My British Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 426, The Sewage Effect of Ireland. Using his personal connections, Jellishon invited 200 senior weavers and their families to England. At a cost of more than £1,000, he finally completed the task assigned by His Majesty the King within a month. As the situation in the Netherlands became more and more turbulent, he did not need to spend money at all, and many senior weavers begged him to take it away. In fact, when he first accepted this task, Jellishon understood the king's intention to steal a teacher. Although the United Kingdom has a vast market due to its alliance with Spain, the textile industry has also begun to take off. But just like China later, it only occupies low and mid-end technology, and is at the bottom of the textile industry to make money. The profits it obtains cannot be compared with the Netherlands. For example, in the production of high-grade woolen cloth, only the Dutch have this technology and sharp weapon. Every year, the partner royal family imports a large amount of high-grade woolen cloth from the Netherlands to meet their own needs. Moreover, the same is true for silk. Not only does England have no Oriental silk technology, it even has no European imitation silk technology. And when he came to the Netherlands, he shouldered the requirement of innovating technology for the country. When he thought of this, Jellishon felt that he had made an important contribution to the entire kingdom in this way. While lamenting his contribution, Jellishon recruited hundreds of senior weavers for his factory. With these people, I am afraid that the profit of my factory will double in the coming year. After renting a merchant ship for 3 days, Jellishon returned to England with the weavers and their families. I knew the situation in the Netherlands was in turmoil, so I should have brought more thank you boats. Alice. Jellishon sighed as he looked at the crowded boats. Not long after he left with the senior weavers, the governor's office of the Netherlands got the news. Your Excellency, an Englishman brought many people from the Netherlands to leave the country. The young staff member bent down and reported respectfully. Understood. Don't worry about how many heretics leave. Workers, Nederlando is. The Duchess of Parma pondered for a moment, and ordered decisively as the staff went down. She murmured softly, "It's fine, let those heretics leave. I hope that after those activists leave, the Netherlands will return to stability. It would be nice to continue to be a cow." Until now, the female governor still can't figure it out. These Dutch people don't believe in Catholicism, so they have to become a heretic and return to the embrace of our Lord. Isn't it good? In the original history, since the turmoil in the Netherlands, about 30,000 Dutch people came to England to escape the Dutch Revolution. Their arrival made Elizabeth I very happy and was very welcome. After the arrival of this group of textile workers, England's textile technology was greatly improved, making England's exports from low-end to high-end all at once. Thus, a solid foundation was laid for the rise of the entire empire on which the sun never sets. However, Queen Elizabeth has tasted the price for this. Although the arrival of these Dutchmen made England's technology advance by leaps and bounds, it also allowed the original narrow Calvinism to expand wildly, forming a wave of anti-establishment religion all at once. Before her death, those Puritans were still clamoring to reform the state religion and abolish the bishop system. Damn, the bishop system is a sharp weapon for the king to control his mind. If it is abolished, the kingship will be shaken in terms of technology and religion. Edward has been entangled in his mind. England is not the United States. It cannot absorb immigrants regardless of the consequences. Inherent traditions and conservatism are the foundation of social stability. The arrival of immigrants will make the whole society a mess. What's more, His Majesty Edward is not willing to delegate power. After thinking about it, His Majesty Edward finally decided to selectively admit some elite technical talents, and after obtaining their skills, if they still don't convert, they will be exiled to Ireland directly. Up to now, the young His Majesty the King finally no longer ideally turned Ireland into land like England. Moreover, the existence of a large number of Celtics cannot be completely accommodated. Ireland is not treated as a colony like previous kings. His young Majesty is ready to make the island of Ireland the outfall of the United Kingdom. Let Puritans, Catholics, and all kinds of messy believers go to Ireland to feel the warmth of the Celtics. It would be easier to control if, by the way, they could be influenced to break them apart from the Catholic whirlpool. Soon, with the arrival of the merchant ship, His Majesty the Great King personally received these high-level weavers, greeted them cordially, and praised them for abandoning their homes and coming to the United Kingdom for their dedicated spirit. The senior weavers and their families, after being received by His Majesty the King, cried bitterly and patted their chests to promise that they will definitely train more workers for the United Kingdom and make more contributions to the entire United Kingdom. Thanks, King. Thank you, government, accompanied by the kingdom's Prime Minister William Celsey and other cabinet members closer to home. After this pleasant interview, His Majesty Edward directly arranged these people into several large textile factories under the royal family, where they were supervised to teach technology and not to spread religious messages afterwards. His Majesty the King met with Prime Minister William Celsey and asked him to draft a new immigration bill. The requirement is that anyone who does not believe in Anglicanism is not allowed to preach in the United Kingdom, and those who violate it will be exiled to Ireland and become immigrants and drafted again, unless they are state personnel. They are not allowed to instigate and agitate others, and carry out dissemination of non-state religions, and all offenders will be sent to Ireland. Such severe treatment of missionary personnel and missionary activities shocked the entire cabinet. But the cabinet soon cooperated. The draft is submitted to the king by the cabinet. After receiving a positive reply, it is forwarded to the joint parliament. After approval, it is passed to the Supreme Joint Court for promulgation, and then the regional councils vote for approval. Finally, the regional Supreme Court promulgates. After these processes were completed, a month passed, and the strict law was implemented across the United Kingdom. In name, the Parliament still exercises the legislative power, and the power still belongs to the people. In name, this, everyone is familiar with it. I didn't say it. With the teaching of Dutch textile workers, the textile level of the entire England continued to improve, and the shipment volume also recorded an increase. On the contrary, the Netherlands region still maintains a slight turmoil, with undercurrents surging, and its position in the entire textile industry slowly begins to decline. As a result, Edward believed that within 5 years, England would overtake the Netherlands and become the #1 textile region. Chapter 427, Irish Conqueror. By the end of 1559, the whole of Ireland was finally at peace. Dublin, Ireland's largest port and regional capital, is buzzing today. On the streets of Dublin, people are singing and laughing, smiling, clowns, singing and dancing, and even magic. All kinds of hawkers are hawking loudly. Pedestrians are in an endless stream, looking up frequently, not knowing which product to choose, and the children also surrounded the clown, clapping their hands while running, singing folk songs from nowhere in the streets and alleys. The army also lazily leaned against the wall, chatting from time to time, with smiles on their faces. People no longer need to fear attacks as they once did. Today is a happy day, but also a day of great significance. Today, all the left-behinds from all over the island of Ireland came to Dublin and the governor's palace to celebrate the successful conquest of Ireland. Yes, it took 9 years to finally conquer all of Ireland. Yes, that's right, on the island of Ireland. At the end of this year, almost all the tribes swore allegiance to His Majesty Edward, conferring dozens of titles, hundreds of knight titles. Of course, the highest title would certainly not exceed the Earl, and an Earl was already their highest rank after more than 3 months of reporting and statistics. The population of the entire Irish region has reached 500,000, with more than 103,000 immigrants and nearly 400,000 Celtics. This is still the result of the massacres in various strongholds. According to the statistics of later generations, the colonial rule in the past few years has wiped out at least 300 large and small tribes, and more than 100,000 people have disappeared from this world. Gentlemen, please be quiet. Governor of Ireland Thomas Maine pressed his hands, showing a smile, and said excitedly, although a few days ago, many tribes went to London to accept His Majesty's canonization, but the specific territorial contract has not been signed yet, and Ireland has not really been accepted into the embrace of the kingdom. When His Excellency the Governor spoke, including the remaining officials and the chiefs of the big tribes, all of them held their breath for fear of disturbing his speech. Yesterday, the decree from the king and the cabinet was officially delivered to me. Everyone listened carefully, hearing something related to their own vital interests. The dozens of big tribal leaders who arrived immediately pricked up their ears after glancing at the serious crowd. His Excellency the Governor continued, Earls are allowed to have 500 private guards, Viscounts are allowed to have 300 private guards, Barons are allowed to have 200 private guards. Knights are allowed to have less than 100 private guards. Hearing this, all the tribal leaders suddenly showed smiles on their faces, which was in line with their expectations, and even exceeded their expectations. In the past, when the population was only a few thousand people, excluding the old, the weak, the sick and the disabled, only a few hundred people were obtained, which was quite in line with his requirements. Seeing the many tribal leaders smiling, Your Excellency Governor twitched his mouth and continued, however, In order to protect the security of Ireland, every baron and above nobles must contribute half of their private soldiers. As the army of the Kingdom of Ireland, knights and jazz need to contribute £10 a year as a contribution and as military expenses for the army. What? How is this possible? The tribal leaders were shocked when they heard this, and began to discuss in this way: wouldn't these big tribal leaders be almost the same as those small leaders? Talk about status quiet. Your Excellency the Governor yelled loudly, raised his brows, and said sharply, I'm reading out a king's decree. Who wants to die? Since you have pledged allegiance to our king, you should take corresponding responsibilities, otherwise, your tribe would have gone to see God long ago. Seeing these leaders lower their heads, His Excellency the Governor continued to read, 50 miles for earls, 30 miles for viscounts, 20 miles for baronets, 10 miles for knights and lords, 50 square miles is equivalent to the size of 5 Macau, and all noble fiefdoms add up to 1/5 of the island of Ireland. Even the smallest 10 miles has tens of thousands of acres, which is enough for the tribal people to live. Regarding the area of these lands, these naturalized leaders have received some common sense education, coupled with explanations. They are very satisfied with these. Most of them were beyond their living area, and the resentment for the previous terms disappeared a lot. So everyone accepted it in this way. His Majesty Edward got 4/5 of the Irish land out of thin air, and the Celtic tribes were also satisfied, and everyone was happy. However, what all the tribes didn't expect was that the current population and land can certainly accommodate it, and even have a surplus. And what if decades later? What about population growth? Everyone can't think of it. All nobles are required to pay taxes to the governor mansion. The earl has 100 sheepskins or £100 per year. All nobles are not allowed to fight without authorization, fight, and obliterate against each other. All nobles are not allowed to change the size of the fief without authorization, and those who violate it will be obliterated. In this way, the 16 laws strictly stipulated the order of the island of Ireland, and also entrusted the nobles with responsibilities and obligations. This has also become the pervasive law of the island of Ireland, and the Irish are also used to call it the agreement between the king and the Irish. But to more people in the United Kingdom, the Dublin Code is still the most familiar. It is also difficult for Our Majesty the King to rack his brains on how to rule Ireland. Feudalism? County system? Or a colonial system? Or a military region system directly under the army? All these flashed through the king's mind one by one. Finally, in desperation, he thought of the cabinet, the head of the coalition government. After several days of discussion by the cabinet, combined with the actual situation in Ireland, a combination of feudalism and county systems was chosen, also known as one island, two systems in 1/5 of the places occupied by the Keyites. An enhanced version of medieval feudalism was implemented in 4/5 of the places occupied by immigrants. The county system is implemented. In other words, each manages its own and does not conflict with each other. In this way, the entire island of Ireland is at peace. It's just that Edward didn't care about whether the island of Ireland, where 100,000 people accounted for 4/5, was suitable, nor would he remind those tribes of their troubles after the population growth. But it's a great merit to bring the Celts of Ireland back from slavery to, no, straight to feudalism. His Majesty Edward feels that he has contributed a lot to helping the Celts directly save civilization from ignorance. At this time, the cabinet tactfully reported that he wanted to add the title of Conqueror of Ireland to him, but his attitude was still very firm. Edward had no choice but to accept it. Although he had never been to Ireland once, there was originally a title of Conqueror of Scotland, but considering the feelings of the Scottish nobles, Edward did not accept it. After all, Scotland has already been united with England, and it is also one of the main fulcrums of the United Kingdom. Taking this title is very embarrassing and easy to provoke hatred. However, for the title of Conqueror of Ireland, it also sounds good. His Majesty Edward is very satisfied. Chapter 428 Parting. The completion of Ireland's feudal system was very short. In less than half a year, all Irish nobles completed feudalization and divided their territories and people. After that, among the remaining 4/5 of the land, except some mountainous rivers and barren land, the rest is either plains or arable land, which is very suitable for planting and grazing. The Governor's Office of Ireland also implemented the Edict from London, dividing Ireland into 4 major provinces and 32 counties, basically following the ancient Irish system. Among them, resettlement measures were carried out centering on 64 strongholds. Soon, the number of 100,000 immigrants increased to 150,000 by the end of 1561. The combined army composed of Irish nobles has also reached 10,000 people. And with the immigrant army composed of 5,000 people, The army on the island has reached 15,000 people. There are 2 million acres of arable land and more than 13,000 pastures, 1/3 of which are owned by the royal family. The nobles and some wealthy people were not to be outdone, and paid a lot of money to buy a lot of land from immigrants, forming manors and ranches, and the number reached 1/3. The remaining 1/3 is owned by the immigrants, but they willingly sold the land to those merchants and nobles because the money from the sale can not only repay debts, but also improve life. More importantly, there is still a lot of land in Ireland that has not been developed. After a few years, if it is sold, it will bring another income. However, this kind of land bonus can't be enjoyed for a long time. Among them, the huge benefits have made the governor mansion, the coalition government, and the royal family look down on it. This kind of costless land development is simply too profitable for ordinary people to afford. In Dublin, on the port pier, beside the Long Trestle, countless Irish aristocrats and businessmen came here in their clothes and leather shoes to give a farewell. Flowers and flags will constitute a new look for the entire pier, and people shout and rejoice to send off these heroes. Your Excellency, your departure is truly our Irish regret. The Speaker of the Irish Parliament had a long beard and a face full of pity, looking at the Governor Thomas Maine, who was about to board the ship. With affectionate expressions behind His Excellency the Governor, there are more than 60 other strongholds staying behind. They will return to London together with the Governor, be received by His Majesty the King, and be briefed on their posts. What awaits them is promotion and salary increase. Therefore, except for some old people who were a little sad, such as Sir John Perrott, the faces of the others were inexplicably excited, chatting happily with each other, and looking forward to their future. This is what I should do. As a gentleman's traditional virtue, Governor Thomas has always maintained a modest attitude, shook his head, and said softly, after all, His Majesty the King and the Kingdom government entrusted me with important tasks. As a member of the Kingdom, I should serve them as I should. There is nothing to say. Your Excellency the Governor's calm appearance made everyone admire him even more, and there were endless praises. Hearing this, Your Excellency the Governor showed a faint smile, pretending to be aggressive. No, the aristocratic temperament is undoubtedly revealed. It is not a nobleman. It is better than a nobleman. Everyone knows that after the conquest of Ireland, the Governor, who has been in charge of Ireland for nearly 9 years, will definitely be canonized as a nobleman, leave Ireland, a barbaric place, and establish a good relationship in advance. After everyone praised you, the Speaker of the Irish Parliament continued to ask, Your Excellency, all of us have witnessed your achievements. Therefore, we plan to jointly sign a letter and state your great achievements to the Cabinet and His Majesty Edward. Also, in order to thank you for your kindness, we have collected some souvenirs for you and put them on the boat. People are going to be sky high and let the birds fly, and get promoted and get rich. Now it's okay to be a favor in advance in this regard. The upright governor quickly refused to back down, but the congressmen and officials insisted on writing a letter. Suddenly, the atmosphere of the whole pier became more cheerful. After accepting helplessly, feeling that the time was almost up, Your Excellency the Speaker asked carefully and softly, as if he was not paying attention, What do you think of the next governor? After these words fell, everyone fell silent for a moment, staring straight at the governor, waiting for his speech. The next Governor General has always been a source of uneasiness in everyone's hearts. The basic interests of all those present are in Ireland. In this era when the power of the governor is scary, the choice of the governor is related to everyone's vital interests. A normal governor is what everyone looks forward to. This. Hearing this question, Thomas pondered for a while, and frowned. No one dared to disturb the Governor General, who had not left office, and waited anxiously and cautiously for his recovery. I can't say it. I can't say it. He shook his head and said with a wry smile, Although as the former governor, he has the right to recommend the next governor to the king, even if he reveals his goal, although he can get the respect of these Irish people, but it will definitely have an impact on his future prospects. However, people are giving money and submitting letters, so I can't refuse them. It's really a tricky way. After wandering in my mind for a few seconds, Your Excellency the Governor finally smiled. Haha. The governor has great responsibilities, and the candidate must be carefully selected. How do I know? This is a matter of concern for the Cabinet and His Majesty the King. As soon as these words came out, everyone was frustrated. However, in Ireland's choosing, the governor is related to the safety and stability of the island. I think the Cabinet will definitely give priority to meeting those officials who have known it before. As he spoke, he didn't know whether it was intentional or unintentional. He glanced at the many left behinds behind the bustling crowd. Seeing this, everyone understood, and quickly changed the topic of relaxation. For a while, the air was filled with joyful factors. Soon, The three figures in charge of the colonization of a province, including Sir John Pert and Lemuel Walson, as well as some famous left-behinds, all received gifts. For example, when Sir John was having a good time chatting with his colleagues, he suddenly received many congratulatory greeting cards from the butler, as well as some Irish souvenirs, which made him look confused and couldn't figure out why he was suddenly popular. Flipping through it casually, the greeting card also contains a lot of information about the lady. Of course, the focus is on one of the columns, unmarried. In this way, Sir John, who is already married, couldn't help but shook his head and smiled wryly, and could only order his housekeeper to put it away quickly, so that his wife would not see it when it was just about to leave. It was a merchant ship. When it left, two small cargo ships followed behind the merchant ship, with a deep draft. Chapter 429. Ireland is very close to England, and within half a day, the ship arrived at the port of Bristol, an important town in southwestern England. Hundreds of people, including family members, received a warm welcome from the Bristol city government and arranged accommodation. The next day, the carriage was arranged again, which moved the heroes of the Irish colonization. Your Excellency, the mayor is really a warm-hearted person. The family sat in the carriage in front, with some personal belongings beside them, and the rest were placed in the carriage behind. The carriage at the back was looked after by the butler and three servants he had brought from Ireland. Hearing his wife's exclamation, and then taking a look at his daughter, who has become more and more handsome and beautiful, Lemuel smiled softly. Don't think so nobly of him. These arrangements are not specially arranged for us. You said it was arranged by the city government. My wife couldn't help asking with surprise in her eyes. No, it's impossible for the city government. Looking at his wife, who accompanied him to Ireland, worrying about him and his children all the time, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes became more and more obvious, and he looked older and older. With a sigh in his heart, he showed a sincere smile, ignored his wife's shyness, and brushed a strand of long hair on her forehead behind her ears, and then explained, it doesn't matter to the city government, but the city council will never allow the city government to spend money to entertain us at will, even if we are heroes. What's that? Asked the wife, puzzled. The cabinet's arrangement. Lemuel looked into her green eyes and said, or His Majesty Edward's arrangement. Okay, I don't want to talk about politics anymore. After hearing this, the wife felt relieved, turned her eyes to her daughter, and sighed. Suna is 14 years old. It's time to find a husband. With that said, his wife glared at Lemuel and blamed. Ordinary people get engaged at the age of 7 or 8, and get married at the age of 14, but our Suna is 14 years old and hasn't gotten engaged yet. What will happen in the future? Seeing his wife's angry expression, Lemuel quickly apologized. Lemuel has always respected her wife, who has followed him since childhood. Back in Ireland, in that deserted place, there were no young talents who were worthy of Suna. I wouldn't want an Irishman to be my son-in-law. I would be ridiculed in the officialdom. Upon hearing the word Irish son-in-law, the wife shook her head quickly, for she could not accept an Irish son-in-law either. Ireland at this time is like we look at Africa, full of contempt. Do you want your daughter to marry a black man? You're right, dear, said the wife softly. I can't imagine Suna having an Irish husband. It's just awful. Yes, so I plan to wait until I return to London to accept His Majesty's reward, so that our Suna will have more choices, and even marry a nobleman. Thinking of their daughter marrying a nobleman, the two couldn't help but smile happily. On the other hand, Suna watched her parents discussing her marriage, and couldn't help frowning. After staying in Ireland for so many years, she is proficient in horse riding and archery, and her heart has long been wild. She is very resistant to the marriage arranged by her parents. Thinking of this, she stretched out her hand, opened the curtain aside, twisted her brother's thigh with his head facing outward, and only after hearing his loud roar, she breathed a sigh of relief. The younger brother yelled in pain. She just felt that she felt much more comfortable in her heart. What's the matter, Egil? Lemuel asked his wife quickly. It's nothing, it's just that the road is so wide and beautiful. The 12-year-old brother secretly glanced at his sister, remembering her many evil deeds in the past, and said a little aggrieved, really? Let me take a look. Hearing nothing, Lemuel became interested in the long famous national highway, and hurriedly squeezed his son away, and stretched out his head to look. The 12-year-old Egil gave his sister a hard look, protesting against his innocent abuse, and Suna glanced at her younger brother, rolled her eyes, raised her red lips, with a provocative look. Do you dare? Egil, who just wanted to muster up the courage to fight, was immediately discouraged. When he thought of his experience of being kicked off his horse by her, he couldn't help being afraid. His sister was terrible. Seeing her younger brother's resigned expression, Suna glanced at him arrogantly, and went to whisper to her mother Lemire, who looked up, had a shocked expression on his face. I saw that on the national road where the carriage was driving, people were walking on the right side, and there was an endless stream of carriages passing by. There were also sidewalks on both sides of the road, and men, women and children were walking sparsely. This national road is extremely wide and can accommodate about 6 carriages traveling in parallel, and it was extremely level. The carriages in front drove one after another without leaving any potholes on the road, and the carriages drove extremely smoothly. Lemire thought to himself, sure enough, the rumors that the foundation of the national highway was paved with floor tiles are true. No wonder it is so stable. Looking around, there are neat trees planted on both sides of the road. Under the sunlight, there are patches of shadows on the national road, which is convenient for pedestrians to rest. This measure is indeed very good. It can not only take care of pedestrians, but also fix the foundation. Lemire thought, it seems that I have been away from England for so many years, and I have really changed a lot. 3 days passed in a flash, and Lemire and his party arrived in London relying on the smooth national road. This saves 2 days of travel compared to the past, which is indeed gratifying. This is your home when you were young? Tonight, let's live a night of grievance. Lemire came to his hometown and joked. A group of people came to the small house that used to be located in London because they asked their neighbors to take care of them. The house still looks relatively complete, although a bit dirty. What? This is the place where I lived when I was a child. It's too dilapidated. Egil couldn't help complaining when he saw the shabby house. Compared with the mansion in Ireland, even the toilet was not as good. Bang! Suna hit him on the head and scolded, "You were born here, why complain?" Suna still has some vague memories of this place, and her heart is full of nostalgia. "Suna, don't be so violent," her mother quickly reprimanded, and then said softly to her son, "Egil, your father is just joking. We are staying in a hotel today, HMPH. Suna snorted coldly and turned her head away. Just as the family was talking, there was a sudden sound of surprise from the side. "Are you Mr. Lemire?" A man in his 40s, with wrinkled face and wine in his hand, asked in disbelief. "You are Mr. Rodney." Lemire turned his head to see that this was his old acquaintance, and shouted loudly. At this moment, Lemire felt an inexplicable emotion in his heart. It was this person's recommendation that allowed me to obtain my current status, and I couldn't help but feel a lot of emotion in my heart. Chapter 430. The next day, in the palace, His Majesty the King received the heroes of these kingdoms in order to commend the outstanding contributions of these warriors. The Palace Affairs Office ordered some medals according to His Majesty's opinion, which can also be called the clover medal. The medal is mainly made of gold, with a 3-leaf clover engraved on the front, and 2 swords are engraved on the 3-leaf clover. Crossed on the 3-leaf clover on the back, there is a flower print of a brave knight. The horse raises its hooves, and the knight swings his sword. It looks very inspiring and extraordinary. Clover is a plant that the Irish people love very much. 80% of the entire Irish region is composed of pastures, and clover is one of the most common and high-quality pastures, and is very popular among Irish people. The clover is called white clover, but the Irish gave it a beautiful name, Shamrock. Therefore, this medal is also called the Shamrock Medal. This medal has great political significance. It symbolizes the official annexation of Ireland by the United Kingdom and the achievement of expanding its territory. So, outside the palace, these heroes stood in a row, and the drummer beat the music. Setting off the joyful atmosphere, the nobles and ministers of the kingdom stood on both sides as onlookers under the eyes of everyone. His Majesty the King finally came out and showed his face. The nobles and ministers hurriedly bowed their heads to salute, and the band also played high-spirited and cheerful music. At the right time, the king stood in the center with a faint smile on his face. The prime minister, wearing a wig, stood beside him respectfully, holding a paper book in his hand, glanced at the bottom, and then read aloud, "Gentlemen and ladies, today, in recognition of the contributions made by the heroes of Ireland to the kingdom and the royal family, His Majesty Edward will personally award medals to these heroes as a commendation." Papa Papa, everyone applauded tactfully, showing respect. "Okay, I now invite His Majesty the King to speak." The Prime Minister took a step away tactfully, highlighting His Majesty the King hero. "The royal family will never forget, and neither will the government. The Clover Medal awarded today is to let everyone remember forever. There are still these heroes in the kingdom." After a short speech, there was another burst of applause. William Celsey glanced at Thomas Marne, who was a little dazed, and reminded softly, "Sir, it's your turn." "Okay." Thomas immediately reacted, took a step forward, and saluted again in front of the king. Edward nodded and glanced at the Prime Minister. William Celsey hastily opened the book and read aloud, "Thomas Maine followed the will of the Lord and obeyed the arrangements of the royal family and the government. He was brave and good at fighting, quick in thinking and decisive. During his tenure as Governor of Ireland, he was loyal to the royal family, fully exerted his duties, and gradually conquered Ireland." While the Prime Minister was reading, Edward put the medal around his neck. "Well done, my governor." His Majesty the King said with a smile, "This is my duty, your Majesty." Thomas Maine lowered his head and said seriously. Seeing this, Edward smiled, and after the Prime Minister finished reading, he moved on to the next one. In this way, it took more than half an hour to finally distribute more than 60 medals. The presence of the king and the spectators of the nobles made this group of young heroes overjoyed, their heads held high, and they felt a little erratic at this time. Everyone thought in their hearts, "Today is really a moment of honor." At the moment of being awarded the medal, an impulse to dedicate their lives to His Majesty the King suddenly surged in everyone's hearts, and it went straight from the spine to the sky. His Majesty the King and the nobles left the venue one after another, and the medal winners naturally also left. Sir John carefully looked at the medal in his hand, especially at the exquisite pattern on its surface, and was overjoyed for a moment. This represents his achievements, and also represents the affirmation of his achievements, which is worth showing off. However, although he didn't care about the material, the medals made of gold are much better than the silver medals before. If it's not good enough, you can get more money when you mortgage it. "Hey, sir." Sir John Perrot, who had devoted himself to the medal, noticed that someone was calling him. He couldn't help turning his head to see a tall, dark-faced man walking over, wearing high-grade linen clothes, about his age, and he seemed to have returned from Ireland. When he got closer, he took a closer look, and it turned out to be the famous Irish Lemuel Watson, a generous and glorious left behind during the colonization of Ireland, the pioneer of Leinster province. He also bears the nickname, the Pioneer of Munster. There were so many thoughts in his mind, but John Perrot quickly greeted him, with a smile on his face instantly. "Oh, Mr. Jazz, it's really hard to see you." Lemuel sighed softly, looking at the well-maintained Jazz in front of him. "Sorry, Mr. Lemuel, I was thinking about something just now, and I didn't notice it." "I'm sorry." Sir John replied very politely. "It doesn't matter, I came this time just to raise money to congratulate you." Lemuel said with a smile and an expression of indifference. "Congratulations?" Sir John's head was full of doubts. "My sir, is there something gratifying that happened to me?" As he said that, he turned his puzzled eyes to Lemuel in front of him. "Sir, don't you know?" Lemuel said deliberately in an exaggerated tone, "Next week, His Majesty the King will hold a knighthood awarding ceremony at the Palace of Westminster, and you are likely to be canonized as a baron. Congratulations you." "Oh, nothing. Modesty is an essential virtue of nobles." Sir John shook his head with a smile, and said, "The specific situation hasn't come out yet, so how do you count, then?" After chatting for a while and sending a blessing, Sir John said goodbye to Lemuel and boarded the carriage. HMPH. "Who doesn't know that you are the illegitimate son of His Majesty Henry VIII, and you still pretend to be in front of me?" Judging by his appearance, the baron must have been obtained. Looking at his receding back, Lemuel turned and left, thinking about it in his heart, not paying attention to John Perrot's pretentiousness. However, he felt envious and jealous of him getting the title of baron. A week later, at the Palace of Westminster, His Majesty the King and the nobles came one after another, together with some important officials from the kingdom. The Palace of Westminster couldn't bear it. This canonization ceremony is very grand, which is also exciting. On this day, 2 barons, John Perrot and Governor Thomas Marne, 12 hereditary knights, and dozens of lifetime Jazz were born. These people have obtained the corresponding territory, but they are located in Ireland, so the nobles in London also call them Irish nobles. In the island of Ireland, the nobility has since been divided into 2 factions. Chapter 431. Inspecting the Army. At the end of 1561, the cabinet headed by William Celsey had been in office for 5 years, and had served as the Speaker of the Privy Council of England for 5 years. In this way, in view of William Celsey's outstanding achievements in governing the country in the past 5 years, the stable development of the British Kingdom's economy, and the unstable situation in France, His Majesty Edward decided to continue to serve as a cabinet member. So, on December 8, William Celsey officially started his 2nd term in the Privy Council of England, and the next day, he started his 2nd term as Prime Minister of the coalition government cabinet. Subsequently, in Scotland, the Earl of Argyll continued to serve as the Regent of Scotland. and Faris Alexander served as the Regent of Wales. As for the post of Governor of Ireland, it will be held by the outstanding Baron John Burrows for the command of the Irish Army. Edward also dispatched ministers after discussing with the cabinet. The cabinet also drafted a list of Calais and Brisne in France, and presented it to Edward. After considering his ability and background, His Majesty Edward chose to agree. Afterwards, new parliamentary elections were held in England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and even Calais and Brisne. This election is different from the past. In the past, the members of the parliament were basically elected from the municipalities, and there were only a few seats in ordinary counties. And since the abolition of municipalities, the source of council elections has been cut off. In this way, in order to better unite the interests of the broad masses of the people and make the elite a vested interest group, His Majesty the King announced that each county has 5 places for election. Moreover, every city with a population of more than 5,000 can elect 2 councillors. However, as for the qualification line for having the right to vote, His Majesty Edward did not decrease much, but increased a little difficulty. For example, some cities stipulate that only adult men with a family property of £100 have the right to vote and be elected. On this basis, His Majesty the King has drawn a line, £200. Only adult men who belong to the United Kingdom with a family property of £200, no criminal record, and the right to vote and stand for election will be granted. Thus, by the end of December, just before 1562, local council elections had been successfully held. On the first day of the new year, His Majesty the Great King did not stay in the palace, accompanied by his wife and children, and came to the outside of London in a carriage. United Kingdom Army garrison, 5 miles outside London, on the banks of the River Thames. Located on the banks of the Thames River, it can not only transport food and replenish water nearby, but also quickly advance to the City of London and other cities around the Thames River. It has excellent geographical conditions. In the early morning, the rain has already washed the ground. In this winter, there are still a few drops of water on the grass. After walking a few steps in shoes, it will be soaked in a short time. Then a slightly cool cold wind blows. This sourness, don't mention how vigorous it is, coupled with the wet soil. It is wet and heavy. Ordinary people will not come out under normal circumstances and suffer this crime, but the soldiers of the army were very hard. The sun had just risen, and there was a gleam of light, so they had to pull down the quilt reluctantly and get up quickly under the call of the wake-up call. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of footsteps, as if urging, made other people who were not well yet hurry up and get up to wash. As the squad leader, Open naturally had the responsibility to make his soldiers wake up, wash and eat together. You know, the time for washing and eating is only 20 minutes. In other words, get up at 6 o'clock, and have to come to the pasture before 6:20 to conduct the same Q training. On the playground, the training officer has already been waiting there, ready to spot check. After yelling a few times and urging those guys who were about to stay in bed up, Appa and the whole team began to wash and eat. After drinking a few bowls of porridge, they arrived at the playground on time for boring Q training. Go, 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 turn left, turn right, turn back. Words like this kept ringing out on the playground. Each team formed a row of 25 people, and the team leader stood at the first position and was responsible for shouting afterwards. 10 teams formed a company and stood in the same small square for training. Afterwards, several companies were combined together, and each regiment was integrated for integrated training every month. There is also one day of overall training. Several regiments are divided into 2 parties, and they are trained against each other, including barbers, flag bearers, and musicians all need to be trained. In the afternoon, it is basically necessary to conduct live ammunition training, stepping on drums, filling gunpowder, shooting, and cleaning the barrel. All have to be trained over and over again and learn the meaning of different flags and the meaning of music played by musicians in the evening. The pastor read the Bible aloud to explain doubts to the soldiers. This is what the infantry trains for. The artillerymen were not so troublesome. Bronze cannon showed the prowess in the Italian war, and His Majesty Edward immediately ordered the royal arsenal to manufacture them. Therefore, the most common exercises for artillerymen are loading and unloading shells, cleaning the barrels, and conducting live ammunition exercises. Even if you know that sulfur is very expensive, there is no way to do it. For technical arms, only continuous practice can truly improve the level. Moreover, under the influence of Napoleon in the 18th century, in the next few hundred years of war, the strategy of artillery being king has always been the pursuit of armies of various countries in this European continent. The current understanding of artillery is still insufficient. It is necessary to vigorously develop artillery and start the role of artillery in advance in a corner unknown to many soldiers. His Majesty Edward was inspecting the training of these soldiers with a binoculars. Your Majesty, these soldiers train every day, and they are already very familiar with the Spanish phalanx, which is completely different from the incompatibility of the guards. The guards were accustomed to the old-fashioned combat methods. Since they changed to the Spanish phalanx, none of them adapted to it. After a few years, Edward also gave up. We had to change the guards into cavalry. Among the 6,000 people, there were 4,000 cavalry, 1,000 infantry, and more than 1,000 logistics troops. Although Knight Alexander is getting older, his appearance is still online. He still looks so personable and handsome. His skin does not appear rough because of joining the army, but is as smooth as before. Edward couldn't help but admire him for being so well maintained. Of course, Mr. Knight, I am very convinced of your ability. Edward turned his head and said affirmatively. How many soldiers are there at present, including the logistics staff? There are about 16,000 people, 6 regiments. Each regiment has more than 2,500 people. How is the combat effectiveness? You can go to the battlefield at any time. How does it compare to the Spaniards? This, Knight Alexander pondered for a while, then said cautiously, Your Majesty, we haven't had a formal collision yet, but I'm sure it will be a tie. Okay, I believe you, Knight. Edward looked into his good-looking eyes and said solemnly, Starting today, let the army be ready to go to the battlefield at any time. I think the opportunity for actual combat is coming soon. Your Majesty, is this true? Alexander asked in disbelief. After staying in the barracks for so long, he wanted to go to the battlefield for a long time. Yes, a very long war. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432 War Preparation. Finally, after such a long time, His Majesty Edward recalled the French War of Religion. The beginning period was in 1562, the exact month is unknown, and the end time was at the end of the 16th century, which was the only famous civil war in French history. What impressed Edward the most was that this war directly made the French royal family extinct, and the Bourbon dynasty came to power. Only famous figures such as the Sun King Louis XIV and Louis V could enter the history books. So, at such an important moment, Edward finally couldn't bear it anymore. Knowing the start time, how could he resist not getting involved? After each region formed its own resident soldiers, the Army Command Committee directly controlled all military power, and reorganized all self-built armies and the original army, and the total number of troops reached 30,000. The army will be divided into garrison troops and conscription troops, with 5,000 men stationed in England, 2,000 in Scotland, 1,000 in Wales, and 2,000 in Ireland. The remaining 20,000 were screened out and became the army dedicated to combat. In this way, although the local treasury will assist half of the military expenditure, the amount of appropriation directly proposed by the Army Appropriation Committee to the Cabinet every year has reached £80,000, of which the consumption of gunpowder is the largest. Fortunately, the income of the Cabinet continues to increase every year. Otherwise it will really go bankrupt. Edward couldn't help feeling a little emotional for the Cabinet's strong support. After inspecting the army, Edward began to inspect the Navy again. Although in this war, the Navy is just a soy sauce, but at least it is also a force. After several years of continuous development, the Navy has gradually grown. The 3 squadrons are almost all of the strength of the previous Henry VIII period. That is to say, the strength of the Navy has tripled. Although it is not half the strength of Spain, there is no problem in defending self-defense in the English Channel. After all, the Spanish Navy was basically involved in the Mediterranean, and the Ottoman Empire continued to shed Spanish blood. The number of large ships, that is, gallant ships over 1,000 tons, reached 12, and 2 ships were launched every year. The number of medium-sized ships ranging from 300 to 1,000 tons has reached more than 200. Basically, they are all equipped with bronze cannons. There are more than 10,000 employees, and the annual cost has also soared from £40,000 to £100,000, which almost bankrupted the coalition government. In this regard, Edward's annual support of £30,000 has been directly increased to £80,000, which means that the Cabinet only needs to allocate £50,000 a year. The Navy and Army inspections were completed, and Edward met with Sir John, the Minister of Royal Affairs, who likes to flatter, is stingy, and can do things. Sir, at present, how much cash can the royal family provide? Looking at the aging Sir John and his grey hair, Edward suddenly felt that time passed too fast, Your Majesty. Seeing the beard growing thicker on the king's chin, Sir John couldn't help but sigh in his heart that His Majesty the King has really grown up. He could feel something majestic that made his heart beat faster. As you wish. Sir John put on his reading glasses in consideration of his age, picked up an account book from the secretary behind him, and began to look it up. In this way, quietly, Edward looked at this old man who had served the royal family for many years and was still working hard for the royal family. Even if he knew it, it was because of interests. Many families circled around the big tree of the royal family to gain honor money. After a long time, it has become a habit. People are emotional animals. Looking at this old man who has served 2 generations of kings, Edward was inexplicably moved. I hope that there will be more and more people like this, and the royal family will become stronger and stronger. Edward blessed in his heart, Your Majesty, it has been found out that the cash currently available to the royal family is stored in the Bank of England, and the amount is £300,000. Other income has just arrived, and there is a balance of £200,000 in addition to the next year's expenditure budget, so the total £500,000. Sir John's old voice sounded very clearly in the room. Hearing this amount, Edward couldn't help pondering. £500,000, according to previous wars, it was enough to support military expenditures for 1 year. Seeing His Majesty's pondering expression, Sir John couldn't help but turn pale with fright. Your Majesty, the royal family has become more affluent in recent years, so you must think carefully about it. Seeing that Mr. Jazz, who has always been stingy, began to persuade him again, Edward couldn't bear to speak directly to him, so he couldn't help explaining. Sir, the money is needed urgently. You must prepare the money and transfer it to the account of the Army Appropriations Committee tomorrow. What? Sir John was startled. Is this going to war? Yes, sir, let's get ready. Edward nodded without denying it. Then, taking another look at Sir John slowly leaving back, Edward immediately left the room and came to a conference room in the palace. Here, an imperial meeting will be held. Attending the meeting were the Earl of Argyll, the Regent of Scotland, Ferrers Alexander, the Regent of Wales, Baron John Perrott, the new Governor of Ireland, the Speaker of the Privy Council of England and the Prime Minister of the Cabinet, William Cecil, and members of the Cabinet. His Majesty too, shouted the guard. Your Majesty. Everyone stood up and saluted. After His Majesty Edward took his seat, Your Excellency the Prime Minister stood up and said, the convening of this imperial meeting is only for one thing, the increasingly fierce civil war in France. As soon as the voice fell, discussions immediately rang out in the conference hall. Although as high-level people, many people already know the turbulent situation in France, but they still don't believe that this European power will fall into civil strife. Your Excellency, the Prime Minister, could not help but cleared his throat and explained, since the death of Henry II, the false King of France, the young François II came to the throne. He has a huge head, extremely thin hair, a very thin neck, and a mouth full of saliva. It is said that when he put on the crown, he shouted loudly, "Take this thing away, it will break my neck." As soon as the joke was told, everyone couldn't help laughing. Although it was fake, the young king was indeed very weak, and he went to see God. Less than 2 years after he ascended the throne, his younger brother Charles IX ascended the throne. Although Charles IX came to the throne, the French king was deeply influenced by his mother, Catherine de' Medici. He is a cowardly and independent king. Since Calvinism was introduced into France, the political situation in France was turbulent, and conflicts occurred from time to time. The Catholic nobles headed by François de Lorraine, Duke of Guise, and his younger brother Cardinal Charles, and Condé. Huguenots headed by the Prince, Admiral Coligny, King Navarre. According to speculation, in the near future, there will definitely be conflicts between the two factions in France, and there is a great possibility of civil strife. After His Excellency the Prime Minister finished his speech, everyone was thinking with their heads down, digesting the information. Which faction do we choose to support? Asked the Chancellor immediately. I think it's still Huguenots, and they're Protestants anyway. No, it's still the Catholic sect. Catholics are the most powerful and have more chances of winning. No need to talk anymore, let's prepare for war first. Let's discuss the preparations. Your Excellency the Prime Minister patted the table and said, and Edward still sat comfortably, listening to their speeches and observing. Chapter 433 National Position. To be honest, although we don't know the historical results, Edward wanted to support the Catholic sect based on the supremacy of the Bourbon family and the fact that the state religion of France was still Catholic. After all, the leader of the Catholic Church, the Duke of Guise, is the uncle of his own Queen Mary, so there is still a relationship. However, The characteristics of the United Kingdom forced Edward to support the Huguenots, that is, the hated Calvinists. Many people forget that the United Kingdom is a Protestant country, and the state religion is Anglicanism. Although the reform is not thorough, it is indeed a Protestantism. England at this time, it is not modest to say, is the land that Europeans yearn for after the founding of the United States in the future, the country of lighthouses. It's just that the United States is a beacon of enlightenment, while Britain is a beacon of Protestantism. All Protestants target England, and their continuous propaganda and revolution are too great for England to improve its international status. More importantly, Henry VIII shamelessly admitted that he was a lighthouse country, and shamelessly publicized it after so long. Not only foreigners have believed it, but even many Chinese have believed it. In this way, in the eyes of Europeans, Britain and Protestants are equated, and their international status has been greatly improved by their religious status. Therefore, it doesn't matter if Britain and Spain form an alliance against France. Anyway, France is a Catholic country, and Protestantism has nothing wrong with Catholicism. But at this time, if you support Catholicism, it will cause a collapse of identity. That is to say, the personality setting is similar to that of a star, and the UK is a Protestant country in the 16th century. When religion still dominated people's basic necessities of life, it was necessary to be cautious about such religious personalities. This time, we will support the Huguenots. The maximum number of troops we send is 10,000. Let's discuss the preparations. After dropping a sentence to set the tone for this discussion, His Majesty the King stopped speaking. Next, everyone at the meeting began to discuss preparations for war, recruitment of militia, preparation of soldiers' weapons and equipment, food, clothing, preparation of horses, combat commander, and the number of troops already dispatched. A series of discussions were carried out. Finally, an hour passed by, and every detail of the war had a person in charge. For example, the ruling Earl of Argyll in Scotland needs to recruit Highland warriors, supply wool, supply horses and other tasks. In this way, the preparations for the war are planned, then everything is ready. And the only thing left is the East Wind. Mr. Prime Minister, I don't know how much war preparation the coalition government can provide. Looking at William Celsey, who was discussing non-stop and with sweat on his forehead, Edward asked naturally this, Your Majesty. William Celsey quickly lowered his head. Your Excellency the Chancellor of the Exchequer is familiar with this. Edward turned his eyes to the Chancellor, who suddenly became nervous, looked at his swollen belly, and asked, Sir Anthony, how much war funding can the current coalition government provide? Basically, every cabinet member will receive a knighthood, which is an unwritten rule. Therefore, in theory, the ruling class of the kingdom is all nobles. After speaking, he looked at Sir Anthony's stomach again, and thought to himself, the position of Chancellor of the Exchequer is really very supportive, but after a few years, his stomach and body have grown round. It seems that he is not less greedy, Your Majesty. After the development of the kingdom's business in the past few years, the kingdom's finances have become a little better. In addition to paying off the debts, there are only £100,000 left. Sir Anthony glanced at His Majesty the King and noticed his teasing expression. After looking at him, he immediately changed his words. However, the kingdom's fiscal revenue of £300,000 this year has just arrived. Cut some unnecessary budgets, and there can be an extra £100,000. So, Your Majesty, the coalition government can spend £200,000 as a war budget. Hearing this number, Edward nodded and turned his attention to several other local rulers. Hearing this, everyone didn't know that they were not only here to announce the mission, but also bleeding, and everyone felt a burst of pain in their hearts. Your Majesty, England can contribute £100,000 for the war budget. William Celsey said bravely under the cannibalistic eyes of the other three. Edward nodded slightly. Seeing this, the Governor of Wales, Ferrus Alexander, stood up helplessly and said, Wales can provide £50,000, Scotland can provide £50,000, Ireland can provide £20,000. Very good. The royal family invested £500,000 this time, plus £420,000. That's £920,000. If nothing else happens, it's enough for 2 years of military expenses. His Majesty Edward stood up, glanced at these people, and said the other ministers had surprised expressions on their faces. They never imagined that the royal family was so rich. Seeing this, Edward smiled lightly. A rich king speaks with the most confidence. Sir Anthony, yes, Your Majesty, this year, the war tax will not be collected. Let's talk about it next year. Edward said something that the kings of all dynasties dared not say, and when he saw the surprised expressions of the ministers, he felt very majestic and domineering in his heart. To be rich is to be willful. Starting today, set up a war preparation team, headed by Cabinet Prime Minister William Cecil, and others will join in, to prepare for this kingdom operation. Yes, Your Majesty. Everyone stood up and bowed quickly, saluting after the meeting. Businessmen all over London went crazy. Garment factories, leather boot factories, coat factories, sabre factories, grain merchants, wine merchants, and even timber factories have all started lobbying work. The logistics support of 10,000 people is such a huge sum, even if it is a button on the body of 10,000 people. If it is mass-produced, the profits will be intoxicating. Such a good opportunity. How could many businessmen give up money, beauties, houses, horses? As long as you need them, they will be delivered to your mansion continuously. In the past few days, the people in the preparatory team have felt unprecedented enthusiasm. And many people have chosen to fall regarding this. His Majesty the King is indifferent, as long as the goods are not too bad. Anyway, in the current world, the quality of the goods is almost the same. Whoever you buy is not buying. Let these people make some money, anyway. The weapons and equipment are all forged by the Royal Weapons Bureau, so as not to interfere with the victory of the war. Madrid, Spain. Since the official relocation of the administrative center to Madrid, the city has begun to develop rapidly. The population has surged, and the market has become more and more prosperous. But the newly established royal palace is the focus of people's discussions. What ministers have fallen out of favor, which lords have been greened, are all things that people like to hear today. News came from the palace that His Majesty the King suddenly repaid part of the loan 6 months after declaring the palace bankrupt, and borrowed a large amount of money from the Netherlanders and Genoese rascally. Chapter 434, The War Begins. The rise of the French War of Religion. In addition to the necessary contradictions between Protestantism and Catholicism, the Queen Mother Catherine also played a role in fueling the flames. Speaking of this, I have to mention one of the protagonists in the French Wars of Religion. The Duke of Guise. Francois de Lorraine, also known as the Scarred Guise, is the second Duke of Guise. He became the head of the French royal family in 1551. He successfully defended the city of Metz from the Emperor Charles V in 1552 and became famous in the first battle. Later, he defeated the imperial army again in the Battle of Runty in 1554. The Peace of Wessex temporarily suspended his military activities. In 1557 led an army into Italy to help Pope Paul IV, probably also to extend the family's influence on the Anjou heritage. Although was eventually recalled, Marshal Montmorency of France was forced by him to dismiss him and leave the court. The Duke of Guise and his younger brother, the Cardinal, wield power at the Royal Council. He said, "My advice is this and that, we have to do it." Occasionally he even signed decrees the royal way, with just a christening name. However, this kind of monopoly has offended Queen Catherine, who has always been keen on power in order to control the rights of the Guise brothers. Queen Catherine strongly supported the Protestant movement and forgave the Protestants many times, which dissatisfied the Catholic forces in the country. As the royal family secretly supported the development of Protestant forces, the conflict between Catholics and Protestants became more and more serious. In 1560, with the support of the Protestant leader Prince Condé, a Protestant named Larinati tried to organize a conspiracy against the second generation of Cardinal Lorraine, the younger brother of the Duke of Guise, Archbishop Charles. Conspiracy of Ambrose. The conspiracy was discovered in advance and was brutally suppressed, causing a series of assassinations and counter-assassinations, and the social order became increasingly dark. Condé was immediately forced to flee from the court, and the Guise family even covered the sky with one hand. The speeches of the Huguenot leader Couragny against the power of the House of Guise at a meeting of the nobility at Fontainebleau, August 1560, did not affect François II at all. But on the orders of the Cardinal, Condé was caught. It was not until Charles IX came to the throne that the power of the Guise family shrank. But the regent Catherine de' Medici was inclined to support the Protestants in order to defend Catholicism. Francois formed the so-called triumvirate of the Catholic League with his old enemies, the Marshal of Montmorency and Mary Charles of St. Andrew, against Catherine de' Medici's compromises with the Protestants. So, in fact, from 1560 to 1562, France was actually in a kind of social division. The whole of France, the southwestern and southern regions, is basically the sphere of influence of the Protestant Huguenot faction. In the central and northeastern regions, it is Catholic among them. Spain secretly supported the Catholics, while the Huguenots were secretly supported by the Dutch Protestants, the German princes, and the British Kingdom. From February 15 to 18, 1562, the confident Duke of Guise went to Seville to negotiate and cooperate with the Grand Duke of Württemberg, telling him that it was the Calvinist elements that led to the failure of the Poissy Conference. However, The Duke of Württemberg rejected the rapprochement and still chose to support the Huguenots. So, the Duke of Guise, who was in a depressed mood, slowly returned to Paris with his subordinates. At this time, it was by the Blaise River not far from Paris. Riding on a horse, the Duke of Guise was in a bad mood, and the taste of failure was uncomfortable, thinking that the Protestants will soon have more power and support. His Excellency the Duke feels as uncomfortable as eating a scorpion at this time. He, who has always been sensitive, suddenly heard the prayers of believers praying and singing hymns in a large barn, which made him feel even more irritable thinking of this. His Excellency the Duke could not help thinking to himself, it seems that today is not a Catholic holiday. Nor does it sound like Catholic liturgical music. Guard, take a look. Where is this? What are the people inside doing? At this moment, His Excellency the Duke felt tyrannical in his heart, but his remaining reason made him act in order to avoid making mistakes. It is also necessary to send guards to investigate. Yes, Your Excellency the Duke. The guard saluted immediately, and then galloped away, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Resisting his temper, the Duke of Guise heard a humming sound in his ears, which gradually raised the hostility in his heart, especially the depression of being rejected by the Duke of Württemberg intertwined together, bringing him to the edge of tyranny. Now, the guard's answer is a spark, which can ignite the explosives in his heart in an instant. The knights who followed the Duke seemed to have sensed something, and quickly comforted the somewhat frightened horses. They could only communicate with each other with their eyes, not daring to disturb the Duke. The Duke closed his eyes, waiting for the guards to arrive. Cuttin'. There was a sound of horseshoes. Your Excellency, the town of Vassy is next to it, and the people in the town are holding Huguenot religious activities in the barn. The guard didn't dare to look up into the Duke's eyes. His shoulders trembled slightly, and he said softly, sure enough. As soon as he finished speaking, the Duke of Guise looked like a volcano about to erupt, with a hideous face. Sure enough, a group of heretics are performing the ceremony. This is a blasphemy against our Lord. The Duke of Guise looked at the hundreds of knights behind him and said sharply, during the period of the previous king, the Huguenots were not allowed to report religious ceremonies. This is a flagrant violation of my king's edict. Everyone, let us replace our Lord and punish those heretics together. As he said that, a trace of murderous intent flashed in Duke Guise's eyes. Then, under the leadership of the Duke of Guise, hundreds of cavalry broke through the fence and came to the overcrowded big barn. Looking at the thousands of praying Protestants in front of him, the Duke of Guise raised his head proudly without fear, and with a slight sneer, he drew his knife and galloped towards the crowd. Seeing this, the rest of the knights also drew their weapons and charged forward on their horses. For a moment, the Protestants who were still praying couldn't react in time. They didn't expect that someone would rush over directly. Before they could react, they were pushed to the ground and trampled by horses. Killed. The scream pierced into the sky, causing all the praying people to react and run around in panic. For a while, the crowded big barn was in a mess. Corpses, stumps, blood, and even howling townspeople became the main theme of Vassy town. After a surprise attack and killing dozens of people, the Duke of Guise led the people to evacuate. However, the recklessness of the Duke of Guise broke the strange balance in France, and the religious war began. Chapter 435. The Fall of Paris. With hundreds of people behind him, the Duke of Guise was covered with the blood stains. The high-grade seal coat did not make the Duke lose his aristocratic demeanor, but instead had a cold-blooded and majestic temperament, especially the scars on his face, dotted with bloodstains, making him look like a knight who just returned from a bloody battle on the battlefield, not a marshal who slaughtered civilians. Ding dong dong. The sound of horseshoes galloping on the avenue, pedestrians and vendors on the road hurriedly dodged on both sides, guessing which battlefield these cavalry came back from. A few hours later, the Duke of Guise came to a residence belonging to the Guise family, located in the suburbs of Paris, with few people and fascinating scenery. As soon as he got off the horse, a servant led the horse to the stable, ready to clean the old man's dust and fill his stomach. The servants are very self-aware. In the eyes of the master, their own lives are not as important as this horse. The other knights are served by attendants, and scrubbing is also a compulsory course for them. Ignoring the strange gazes from the servants, the Duke of Guise walked directly into the mansion. Oh, my God, my lord, what happened? Please hurry up and change your clothes. The butler was surprised when he saw the Duke of Guise's blood-stained appearance. Come on, hurry up and get ready. The Duke wants to take a bath. The butler, who was walking towards him, saw the Duke's appearance. His face tightened immediately. He suppressed the shock in his heart, and hurriedly ordered, no, let someone invite my brother Charlie. I have something important to discuss with him. Hurry. The last sentence, the Duke of Guise stared into the butler's eyes and said loudly, yes, my lord. The butler was obviously stunned for a moment, and then he realized that he quickly agreed and left quickly after taking off his bloody clothes. The Duke of Guise put on a new dress under the service of the maid, but his face was still covered with haze, so that the maid beside him dared not speak loudly. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. What's the matter? Duke Guise asked with a straight face. My lord, His Excellency the Archbishop is here. The butler's voice came from outside the door. Okay. His Excellency the Duke had a look of joy on his face, put on his leather boots quickly, and hurried out. As soon as he looked away, he saw his younger brother Charles de Lorraine, His Excellency the Cardinal Archbishop of France, sitting on a chair, as if thinking about something. Unlike the rough and strong Duke of Guise, Archbishop Charlie is a bit thin and looks like a scholar. Charlie, you are finally here. The Duke of Guise said loudly when he saw his younger brother. My brother, what made you panic? Bishop Charlie stood up, walked towards his brother, and frowned. Why do you smell like blood? Just now I came across a small town where heresy ceremonies of the Huguenots were held, and Protestant prayers were held in disregard of the ban issued by His Majesty the King. Protestants are not allowed to hold prayers and other ceremonial activities in the Paris area, so in a fit of anger, I directly slaughtered that town. Let my lord wash away the heresy. Having said that, the Duke of Guise said with righteous indignation, and then looked at his younger brother. In this case, the current situation will definitely get out of hand. Bishop Charlie closed his eyes, digesting the exciting news. This massacre is a fuse. Yes, those Huguenots will definitely not let it go, and the Queen Mother has always been inclined to them, so they are very likely to take the opportunity to carry out conspiracy, and even send troops directly. Bishop Charlie opened his eyes. His eyes were deep and incomprehensible, his face was expressionless, and he did not mean to blame the Duke of Guise at all. Instead, he began to think about the consequences and analyzed calmly. That's for sure, the group of Huguenots will definitely take the opportunity to make trouble, so we must act first. Send troops directly to pacify those Huguenot cities and drive away all Huguenot heretics. When it comes to conspiracy or something, the Duke of Guise may not be very good at it, but when it comes to fighting, he has never been afraid of anyone. Even the once mighty Charles V, he also fought with him. His instincts know, at this moment, the news may have spread. They must be prepared. Besides, Paris is so far away from the south, it may not be easy to act first. Bishop Charlie looked at his brother, shook his head, and vetoed. What's more, my Lord Duke, how many troops can the two of us command at present? So, it's really troublesome. The Duke of Guise stroked the scour on his face and muttered. Although the voice was very small, Bishop Charlie could still hear it. His Excellency the Bishop took a step back, sat on a chair, and meditated. After a while, the bishop suddenly looked happy, looked at the Duke of Guise, and asked eagerly, how many troops does the family have around Paris? Here, about 2,000 people, if you add some mercenaries. The Duke of Guise looked at his younger brother suspiciously and replied, François, we use private soldiers to directly control Paris, and control the King and Queen Mother in the palace. Fearing that the Duke of Guise would not understand, Bishop Charles explained softly, Paris is the center of France. Although His Majesty the King is young, he is still the lord of the French nobility and controls the righteousness of France. In this way, we can declare in the name of the king that those Huguenot nobles are rebellious. In this way, we have the upper hand. This is a good idea. The Duke of Guise thought for a while and agreed. I'm going to gather troops and prepare to attack Paris. Duke of Guise said hastily, you will discuss it with the Duke of Montmorency and Marshal Saint-André later. I'm afraid that group of Huguenots will definitely raise their troops by tomorrow. The Duke of Montmorency and Marshal Saint-André are the other two giants of the Catholic League. The Catholic League will definitely fight the Huguenots next, so we must prepare in advance. I know. Bishop Charlie nodded, watching his brother leave in the evening. The Duke of Guise summoned his family's private soldiers, about 2,000 people, and then used his prestige to capture Paris in one fell swoop and control the city gate and the palace. It was midnight, and Queen Catherine had already gone to bed, sleeping soundly at this time. The bedroom was suddenly opened, and a maid hurried in, shouting loudly, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, what's the matter? You dare to disturb me in the middle of the night. If it's not a big deal, I'll have your fruit. Empress Dowager Catherine rubbed her eyes, looked at the flustered maid, and said sharply, Duke of Guise has entered the palace. Chapter 436. The situation is unfavorable. The news that the Duke of Guise controls Paris and controls His Majesty the King and Queen Catherine, the regent, swept across France like the wind, and spread to England, Spain, the Netherlands, and Germany. People have different opinions on this news. As the ambassador of the Kingdom of Britain to France, His Excellency the Ambassador formally issued a statement to the Duke of Guise, strongly condemning this move to seize power by force and control the king, and also issued a warning afterwards. The German princes such as Württemberg, as well as the Swiss state, all issued letters of condemnation, strongly urging the Duke of Guise to withdraw his troops. Of course, apart from this, the powerful Kingdom of Spain did not issue a letter of condemnation, but just made a statement that was not salty or not, and then fell silent. In this way, European countries immediately read the message. Spain supports the Catholic League headed by the Duke of Guise. The United Kingdom and some Protestant countries supported the Huguenots. Afterwards, the Huguenot leader Prince Condé and Admiral Coligny issued a statement of condemnation together, demanding that the Duke of Guise release His Majesty the King and the Queen Mother. In this regard, the Duke of Guise ignored it, and together with the royal steward Montmorency and Marshal Saint-André, he did a great thing in the palace. The maids were busy with their own affairs in a panic, and even the guards did not change, as if nothing happened last night. But in the palace, there was an air of uneasiness. The young Charles IX tremblingly hid in the arms of Queen Catherine, secretly watching the powerful ministers ahead. He was only 12 years old, and he was too frightened to make a sound or cry. Instead, he could only curl up in his mother's arms, secretly looking at these familiar and unfamiliar ministers. Your Majesty, please forgive me for my reckless behavior last night. The situation is really pressing. We are also doing this for the royal family. The royal steward, Montmorency, has always been a moderate and has the closest relationship with the royal family, so he will speak this time. Seeing Montmorency's hypocrisy, Queen Catherine felt disgusted, but at this time the situation was beyond her control, so she could only hold back her temper. HMPH. Your Excellency, you raided Paris in the middle of the night and broke into the palace. This is the so-called for the royal family? Why haven't I heard that there is such a thing in the noble rules? Seeing the few of them convincing each other so kindly, Queen Caitlin slowly calmed down. She knew in her heart that she and her son must be fine, and this group of nobles did not have the guts to commit regicide in this way. She became more courageous, her upper and lower lips moved lightly, and she became sarcastic. A few words made several people look embarrassed, their expressions were awkward, and they didn't know what to say. They are really wronged. Their behavior last night was very immoral for the nobles and insulted the noble demeanor. As a result, Montmorency and Saint-André cast their blame on the Duke of Guise. Seeing this, the Duke took a breath, turned a blind eye to the gazes of the two, stood up and explained softly, Your Majesty, you don't know anything. He bent down, looked straight at the cold-faced queen, and said, neither humble nor humble, since you connived at various acts of Huguenot heresy and issued the so-called Romorantin decree the year before last. The situation in France has been in turmoil. Catholics throughout France are very dissatisfied with the royal family, and if this continues, an unimaginable situation may happen. And you know that there are 16 million French Catholics and only 2 million Huguenots. Your irrational behavior has actually hurt the authority of the royal family. For France, for the royal family, we have to take action. We must not let France fall into the hands of those heretics. At the end, the Duke of Guise held his palm fiercely and said sharply, his eyes seemed to be eating people. The Duke of Guise's words hit Queen Catherine's heart hard. In fact, her lenient treatment of Protestants was just because she wanted to strengthen the strength of the Huguenots, balance the Catholic League and the Huguenots, and allow the royal family to override them and act as an arbiter. At this time, she realized that the population gap cannot be made up, but the royal family is on this crater. However, if they support the Catholic League, the Duke of Guise and others will definitely control the power of the whole of France. And the royal family will be even more dangerous. For a moment, the Queen Mother was in a daze. Your Majesty, this is a joint signature of the French nobles. Please abandon heresy. Catholicism is the only orthodoxy the kingdom needs. The three of them took a step forward, persuading them in a persuasive way. With such a powerful power, the Empress Dowager Catherine's heart suddenly felt heavy. No matter what, let these Catholics fight. Okay. I agree to your request. After saying these words, Queen Catherine felt a little exhausted. The three giants of the Catholic Church couldn't help but looked at each other, with extraordinarily bright smiles on their faces. The next day, in the name of the King of France, the Queen Mother made a treaty with the Pope, the Principality of Savoy, and Spain to form a Catholic covenant. But Queen Catherine did not declare the Huguenots rebels. Because of this, the Huguenots will be completely forced to the opposite of the royal family. For her, both Catholics and Huguenots are subjects of the royal family. Subsequently, in Tours, Anjou, Sens and other places, the Huguenots were massacred by the Catholic Church, and the whole of France began a hate war between Catholics and Huguenots. The blood has already begun to be shed, and the winner of this war must be determined. Meanwhile, the Huguenots hear King Antoine of Navarre, Admiral Coligny, Prince Condé and others also learned the bad news. The Queen Mother has always held a lenient policy towards us. This time, she suddenly turned to the Catholic League. I am afraid she was persecuted. Prince Condé looked at the received letter, shook his head helplessly, and sighed. Having said that, at present, we are at a disadvantage. All over the country, especially in the central region, Catholics massacred and besieged us Huguenots. The congregants are very disturbed, Coligny said unhappily. At this time, the Queen Mother's position is not important anymore. It's time to talk about our situation. First of all, we must call on all the congregants to form a Protestant army to protect their lives. Second, we need to send envoys to Germany and England to ask for military support. We also need money from the Netherlands. As the king of the Navarre kingdom, Antoine was very familiar with these, and said immediately, the kingdom of Navarre is generally held concurrently by a French count. Your Majesty, the king is right. This is what we should do, and the task of forming the Protestant army is entrusted to you, Your Excellency the Prince. Hearing this, Admiral Coligny couldn't help but nodded and said. Chapter 437 The Attacking Prime Minister. On horseback, the envoys from the Huguenots rode to the sea, and then came to London by boat as envoys. Naturally they can't be a small person, otherwise they won't be able to show their sincerity. Baron Peyraguix took on the task of emissary among the Huguenot nobles. Baron Peyraguix is the backbone of the entire faction, and he is also a Huguenot believer. His constant pursuit is to make the Huguenots the orthodox religion of France, but the strength of French Catholicism is too strong. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is the eldest son of Catholicism, and it is difficult for Protestants to shake the situation at this time. As a baron in his 30s, he has enough life experience. Of course, he knows that France today is a powder keg, and if he is not careful, he will be blown to pieces in this way. Being shrewd, he immediately spent a lot of to get this errand. Although I was a little tired, I still had merit and was not in any danger. It was really a rare errand, so, with such a mood, His Excellency the Baron came to London to meet with His Majesty the King, who had little presence in Europe. After getting off the boat, the Baron turned his head and saw that the pier was extremely wide, clean and tidy, and there seemed to be no dust on the ground, as if it was not at the pier, but in some noble mansion. The workers in short jackets follow a different order and work in an orderly manner. Harmony and quiet are their adjectives. More importantly, there were so many merchants coming and going, the various accents were extremely messy, and even some Ottoman merchants could be seen, which made the Baron extremely amazed. This is a place comparable to the port of Marseilles. Are the English already so powerful? The Baron couldn't stop feeling emotional in his heart, but the expression on his face was still as usual. After leaving the pier, the Baron took his attendants, hired a carriage, and headed for the French embassy in England. Along the way, he opened the curtains and looked at the orderly roads and facades, the crowded and orderly streets, the sound of hawking, and the pictures of a prosperous economy, all of a sudden freeze in his mind, which made him even more surprised. It is really surprising that this country, which has had grievances with France for hundreds of years, has developed to such an extent. Then, he suddenly realized something. Only by turning France into the world of the Huguenots, the whole of France will be like England, with a booming economy and a strong national power. Defeating the Catholic League is their only pursuit now. Arriving at the embassy, Baron Peyraguix was cordially received by His Excellency the Ambassador. The ambassador to England is a pro-Huguenot nobleman, so he has no scruples to ask for help. The next day, the representative of the French Huguenots who came to ask for an audience had already arrived at the palace. His Majesty the King, who had already heard the news, did not personally meet the envoy, and held an impromptu cabinet meeting. Everyone, as expected, the French Huguenots have sent envoys to ask for help. Do you have any thoughts? Edward sat on the main seat, looked at these well-dressed cabinet ministers, and asked, Your Majesty, at present, the Catholic League has a huge advantage in the army. For the present plan, the only way to win the Huguenots is to invade Paris immediately and quickly. Hearing this, Edward glanced at the Prime Minister, who had remarkable talent in governing the country but had little achievements in the military. He became curious and asked, What do you mean, Your Majesty? Up to now, the only way for us in the United Kingdom to support the Huguenots is to let the Huguenots make a quick decision, directly approaching the city of Paris, and hold back the main force of the Catholic League. We get the most out of it, Your Excellency. The Prime Minister saw the surprised gazes from the King and the ministers. Feeling a burst of pride in his heart for so long, He has been showing people the image of a civil servant, but not many people know that he also has deep attainments in strategy now. His own words directly shocked everyone, which made him very proud. But our king, His Majesty the King, is clear in his heart. This is the important minister in the Elizabethan period recorded in history, the William Cecils who played a big role in England's defeat of Spain. Sure enough, those who leave their names in history cannot be underestimated, although he didn't know how the religious wars in history were like. According to his own observations, the strength gap between the Catholic League and the Huguenots was indeed very large. The huge population gap alone is an irreparable. Continue, Mr. Prime Minister. A look of relief suddenly appeared on His Majesty Edward's face, which William Cecil could not understand. However, gaining the trust of His Majesty the King is what he should do. Although he is the head of the cabinet, all ministers are appointed by His Majesty the King himself, and he is only the head of civil servants. If you want to make great achievements, you must gain the unity of the cabinet members, and the premise is to gain the trust of His Majesty the King. So, he immediately spoke energetically in this way: let them send troops to hold back the main force, while we send troops to take advantage of Calais advantage and quickly capture Rouen. In this way, the Normandy area is under our control. Then support the Huguenots and let them fight each other with the Catholic League. We will gradually erode France. At that time, it will not be long before France will be bathed in the glory of His Majesty the King again. At the end, William Cecil suddenly became agitated, bowed to Edward with an impassioned look, and then faced the other cabinet members, waving his arms and shouting loudly. Such a scene really shocked everyone, and the speech was so powerful and bold. In fact, after the 100 Years' War, and even in the later period of Henry VIII, everyone in England gave up their pursuit of France, including Henry VIII. This is like the Eastern Jin dynasty in history. If the territory is to be restored, the interests of the South will be consumed. In the end, the people sitting in the court will be the northern gentry, who would like it. The same is true for England. The English people and nobles do not want to sacrifice the interests of England for the king. Although the ministers were stunned for a moment, they finally came to their senses and looked at His Majesty's face from the side. When they found nothing unusual, they understood. Therefore, this proposal was supported by all cabinet members at this point. Sending troops is already an iron fight, but Normandy is a tough bone, so we have to prepare with both hands. Your Excellency Prime Minister said very well, but in addition to Normandy, Brittany also has to go. Chapter 438 Brittany. When it comes to Brittany, you have to talk about the Celtics. As we all know, the Celts were originally the masters of the British Isles, and then the Romans, Vikings, and constant raids made the Celts gradually marginalized. William, Duke of Normandy, was planning to fight in England, but he was blown to Brittany, and the attack time was delayed. At that time, King Harold of England raised an army to resist early, but who knew that he waited for a long time and had no choice but to disband the militia. After that, the title of conqueror came. In fact, in the 5th century, the Celts migrated to the Brittany region, which is now a peninsula near the Atlantic Ocean in France, because of fishing and business. After that, the Celts on the peninsula established their own country, the Kingdom of Brittany, which was later changed to a principality. Although it has always been in French territory, it has always been an independent principality. It was not until the last Grand Duchess Anna married King Louis XI of France that Brittany and France formed the United Kingdom in 1532 and merged into France. In other words, the 6 countries established by the Celts, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, the Isle of Man, the island between Ireland and England, the Duchy of Cornwall, and Brittany. There are also rumors that the British Isles refer to the large islands of England and Scotland, Ireland, and the small islands such as the Isle of Man in between, but this is not the mainstream. It can be said that if Brittany is ruled again, the country established by the Celts has been fully accommodated in the United Kingdom. Moreover, although Brittany has a rugged terrain, its long-term independent status has made it difficult for it to join France in a short period of time, and it has never greatly reduced the difficulty of conquest. The Normandy region and the Brittany region are the 2 peninsulas of France bordering England. If they are occupied, the French navy will basically be abolished. Moreover, unlike Normandy, Brittany's mountains and hills are rampant, easy to defend and difficult to attack. The French government, which was killed by the Japanese Communist Party, and Germany, once wanted to use this place as China's Sichuan to prepare for a protracted war, but unfortunately it was rejected. Even if the Normandy area is lost, Brittany is still the bridgehead for the United Kingdom to attack France. The Mediterranean is dominated by rowing boats, and it is impossible to adapt to the environment of the Atlantic Ocean. At that time, France will suffer. Although the young king didn't know why the British army was so expensive in history, They couldn't even take Normandy, wasting such a good opportunity in vain. However, when he came to him, he would never let this opportunity slip away from him. At this time, the British army had completely plagiarized, borrowed from the Spanish army model, and the famous Spanish phalanx was no longer a Spanish patent. It is always said that Spain is great, but people are often limited to their current understanding. Next, let's take a look at the glorious record of the Spaniard Battle of Marciano, 1554, Spain, Shinra, and Florence 18,500, Medici, France and Siena 15,000, Strozzi. Result: Western losses 200, enemy losses 8,000. Battle of San Quentin, 1557, 10,000 Spanish and Savoy allied forces, Count Egmont, 24,500 French army, Duke of Montmorency. Result: Western losses 200, enemy losses 14,000. Battle of Graveland, 1558, 18,000 Spanish and Savoy allied forces, Count Egmont, 14,000 French troops, de Taramis. Result: Western losses 300, enemy losses 12,500. From this point of view, Spain is completely looking like God sees the boss, my second child, sweeping the trend of the entire Europe. And the navy and army are ahead of the United Kingdom and other countries. The reason why France is so strong and can support it for such a long time is because of its 180,000 population, which gives it a strong stamina. The defeated enemy is not terrible. The terrible thing is that after the failure, you find that the enemy's strength has not changed. Although the strength of the Spaniards' fighting power has something to do with a fanatical Catholic belief, the strength of the Spanish phalanx occupies the main part. But the United Kingdom army, which copied the Spanish phalanx, could not play a real game, but it was still possible to bully France. Therefore, the cabinet ministers who know about the restructuring of the army are very confident about this battle attack in two ways. Divide up and move. This plan has been approved by all cabinet members, and everyone agrees that although Brittany is very poor and has few resources, it has great strategic value and is worth splitting up. The past few decades have been a good time for civil strife in France. As long as we manage well, these two places will become part of the United Kingdom without any accidents. Thinking of this, Edward couldn't help but feel a little excited. God is so pitiful. In my previous life, as an ordinary college student of liberal arts, I knew nothing, only studied history and politics a little. I have been in this world for more than 10 years, and I have never had a chance to show my ambitions. I lived in the British Isles. Ordinary readers are already irritated, and Edward himself was also irritable. After practicing his inner strength for so long, he was finally going to show his skills. Sir Anthony, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the cabinet, saw the joy of His Majesty the King and the Prime Minister, so excited that he could not restrain his lips. Edward noticed the hesitation of the Chancellor of the Exchequer from the corner of his eye, and he was moved in his heart, and asked, "Sir Anthony, do you have any other objections?" As soon as this remark came out, everyone's eyes focused on Anthony, which made his heart tense, swallowed his saliva, and then said softly, "Your Majesty, I just want to say, if we march into France and oppose the Catholic League supported by Spain, will they affect our business? As we all know, the huge Spanish market is the key element for the United Kingdom's textile industry to make great strides forward. If the Spanish market is lost, the consequences will be unimaginable." All the ministers lost their voices, and their faces were once again full of caution. The interests inside were too great. His Excellency the Prime Minister was taken aback when he heard the words, then shook his head and said with a smile, "Not to mention, in our treaty of alliance with Spain, there is no provision that we cannot fight against France, even if Spain forcibly abolishes the treaty or resists certain clauses. If we get Brittany and Normandy, the increase of 1 million people is enough offset with the Spanish market. If the supported Huguenots win, then we can also gain access to the closed French market, where the losses and gains are no longer on the same balance." When the other ministers heard the words, they suddenly realized that there was no longer any hesitation on their faces, and they began to support them with all their strength. Even Edward was a little surprised. He didn't think of this point. As expected, everyone is wise. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439 Responses from all sides. Then, Edward received the envoy from France. He was cordial and kind, as if the person facing him was not an outsider, but his own good friend, although he is already an aristocrat and used to various political performances. This time the king of a country received him in person and spoke to him in a gentle tone, which made Baron Perrig slightly excited. After chatting for a while and explaining the current situation in France, he directly asked for help. Your Majesty, the Catholic League headed by the Duke of Guise is gathering troops and preparing to massacre all Protestants in one fell swoop. Hereby, I request you to send troops as soon as possible to stop the arrogance of those Catholics. Looking at the anxious envoy in front of him, His Majesty the King couldn't help showing a look of embarrassment. Mr. Messenger does not know that the royal family's finances are currently overwhelmed. If it weren't for this, at the moment when the Protestants were being slaughtered in this way, we would have sent troops to attack. How could we have waited until now? As he said that, His Majesty Edward showed a look of excitement and helplessness on his face, which made it impossible to find fault this. Baron Perrig cursed in his heart. He didn't know why. The English were taking the opportunity to ask for it, and they were short of money? Will the big England be short of this money? But he couldn't say it out. Although he was extremely anxious, he couldn't promise anything easily, because his authority was not Higher Majesty. We will certainly understand your difficulties. Baron Perrig sat down, looked at the young king, and said sincerely, I promise, there will be 10,000 pounds of gold coins, and I will send troops to you when you send troops. It will be delivered later. However, at present, it is better to send troops first. The shadow of war has shrouded the southern region, and the danger has come. His Majesty the King was filled with contempt for the anxious and indifferent baron in front of him who doesn't know that France is extremely rich, with an annual income of millions of pounds, a mere 10,000 pounds, to send beggars. Afterwards, His Majesty the King smiled, said that he had something to do, and asked the Minister of Finance to chat with him. The Chancellor of the Exchequer did not disappoint. After more than half an hour of negotiations, he finally raised the amount to 50,000 pounds. Moreover, if the British Army's achievements are remarkable, funds will be delivered one after another. After the negotiations, the United Kingdom Army was ordered by His Majesty the King to prepare for the move. The United Army has been conducting simulation training for the past few months. Today, it is finally coming in handy. Everyone is very happy due to the preparation in advance. A militia of 5,000 people was recruited as a logistics force to be responsible for the logistics of the army. The war preparation team is also very strong. 2 sets of military uniforms for 10,000 people have been prepared, as well as boots, leather whips, belts, socks, medicines, wine, and food for 3 months, all of which have been prepared. And some merchant ships have been requisitioned for transportation. Such a result directly consumed 30,000 pounds. As for gunpowder, 2,000 barrels were prepared in advance, which should be enough for half a year's consumption, but this item directly consumed 20,000 pounds. In other words, before the battle was fought, 50,000 pounds were lost. The 2 armies, 7,000 of whom were commanded by the Alexander Knights, were responsible for attacking the Normandy area. The remaining 3,000 people have been stationed in Edinburgh. The original Earl of Wellington, now His Excellency the Marquess of Edinburgh, is in charge of commanding and attacking Brittany. The reason why there are only 3,000 people in Brittany is because the Normandy region has a good economy and a large population. It is relatively close to the French capital Paris and faces more troops. The second reason is that although Brittany itself has joined France, its barren land and lack of economy are still not welcomed by the French nobles, and there are not many troops in order to cover the army's actions. The Navy specially arranged hundreds of warships to escort and prevent them from being attacked. If so many people sink into the sea, our king will cry to death. At this moment, in the Spanish court, there was a lot of discussion around whether to send troops or not. Your Majesty, the kingdom's finances cannot pay for the French. As you know, the kingdom's finances have been in dire straits. It just went bankrupt a while ago, and the government can no longer allocate funds for the next war. The Chancellor of the Exchequer was tearful towards Philip II, and his whole body was a crying face, wrinkled into a chrysanthemum. A while ago, His Majesty the King had finally repaid part of the debt, and the government came out of bankruptcy. Who knew that His Majesty the King wanted to participate in the French Civil War not long ago, which made him very nervous, and he refused without even thinking about it. Although the palace minister on the side did not express his attitude, he seemed to be neutral, which was the best statement. He did not want Spain to participate in this indifferent war. In particular, His Majesty the King's act of sacrificing the country's finances for the benefit of God made it difficult for him, the Prime Minister of Spain, to agree. Next, not only the Minister of Finance, but also the Minister of State, the Field Marshal, the Navy Marshal, the chief of the royal family. The Chief Justice and others also expressed their opposition. Even the colonial secretary objected, and with good reason, Your Majesty. Although the gold mines in the colony are always shipped to Madrid in a steady stream every year, it is difficult to keep up with the financial deficit. If the plunder continues, the colonial system may collapse, and the kingdom's years of painstaking efforts will be exhausted. Once the credit is off, although the colonial rule gave Spain a powerful blood transfusion, it was only 100,000 gold coins per year. The real outbreak would have to wait decades later. After the colony was established, the collapse of the colonial system was something Philip II did not want, but the glory of God made it difficult for him to make a choice. Your Excellency, the Prime Minister saw the king's contradictions, so he spoke up and made a final decision. Your Majesty, the current heresy in France is far from being an opponent of the Catholic League in terms of strength. If nothing else happens, it is only a matter of time before the Catholic League wins. Besides, the Netherlands region is unstable. In the Mediterranean Sea, there is a more difficult opponent than the Huguenots waiting for us, referring to the Ottoman Empire. It is really inappropriate for the kingdom to disperse its energy on France. When Philip II heard this, coupled with the opposition of all the ministers in the court, his face was full of helplessness for a while, and the current plan was to give up his plan to participate in France. If I had known earlier, I would have postponed the government's bankruptcy time for a few months, and it would have made those businessmen cheaper for nothing. Philip II looked at the sky and thought. In Paris, the Duke of Guise gathered the troops of the nobles of the Catholic League. The army under him has exceeded 15,000 people, and the number of soldiers joining the army is still rising. 10,000 as for the Huguenots in the south. Although the believers had high morale and participated enthusiastically, they could hardly recruit 5,000 people in a short period of time. They made a proactive move. Chapter 440. Capture Orleans. It's already April, and outside Orleans, the endless grass is wet with rain, where flocks of sheep are grazing here, and the shepherd dogs keep their heads up and stare into the distance. The Loire River is the largest river in France, with a length of about 1,000 kilometers. In the era before the railway was built, it was the largest power hub in France, with unparalleled economic benefits among them. Orleans is such a city that enjoys the gift of the Loire River. The Loire River is almost a golden waterway, making Orleans not only an economic hub, but also a southern barrier of Paris. It can be said that Orleans is not only the economic point of Paris, but also a military center. The former Joan of Arc left important and brilliant achievements here. Orleans is only 120 kilometers away from Paris. It can be said to be an important transportation and military route, and it is naturally the place where everyone wants to control. For example, at this time, a battle is erupting at the south gate of Orleans. Boom, kill, puff, all kinds of fighting sounds can be heard endlessly. I saw hundreds of Huguenot soldiers, holding spears and muskets, shooting towards the city gate. Although the defenders near the city gate were small in number, they were tenacious and guarded the entire city gate tightly, and the city gate only showed the width of an arm's length. And the poor city gate, although it was wrapped in iron sheets, was bumpy and extremely ugly. Hundreds of Protestant soldiers, although casualties continued, but their faith made them steadfast and vowed not to retreat. This was the case with Charles. As a Protestant who had been naturalized for several years, he hated the Catholics very much, especially the massacre of Protestants by Catholics broke out a while ago, which made this devout believer feel like a knife. The nobles sat in the back to direct and plan, and he, as the actual commander, personally went into battle and robbed the city gate. With a knife, he chopped off several Catholic guards who were still coming out of the city gate, and Charles swung his knife without hesitation. Blood spurted out from the soldier's neck, and the hot red liquid spilled out directly, dyeing the soldier's body red. Even a few drops splashed on Charles' forehead, but he didn't care about it at all. He still held the knife and accompanied the soldiers around him, pushing hard at the city gate in front of him. Suddenly, a flying arrow shot out from the crack of the door, and before Charles could react, it directly hit his arm, biting it hard, and the sound of entering the flesh was clearly audible. Although the pain kept Charles awake, it also made him bear the tremendous pain hugging his injured arm. Charles stepped back slowly, leaning his back against the wall, looking at the bow and arrow on his arm, which made him tremble with pain. Several confidants hurried over and raised the small wooden shield in their hands, trying to cover his body and prevent flying arrows from being shot. "My lord, are you all right?" a confidant asked anxiously, seeing a lot of blood on Charles's arm. There was a wry smile on Charles' snow-white face. He shook his head, and said, "I'm not as fragile as I am. I will protect you, and I'm going to report the battle situation to my lord." After hearing the order, The confidants quickly recruited a few more people, raised their shields, and covered Charles' whole body as soon as he got out of the city gate. More than a dozen arrows shot directly at the wooden shield, and the tails were even vibrating and buzzing non-stop. Carefully crossing the high bridge over the incomplete moat, the group walked quickly. In less than 10 minutes, Charles and the others arrived at the headquarters and met the commander François de Coligny. He was the younger brother of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, also known as Andrew Char. "What's going on?" Andrew was very surprised when he saw that his general, Charles, was injured, and quickly put down the strangely colored tea in his hand, and hurried over. Although Charles is just a retired player in his 30s, the head of the mercenary army, but he is currently the only he is a general who can be used, so Andrew is currently caring for him very much. "Your Excellency, those city guards are relying on the city wall, and the advantage is too great. If we continue, when the mercenaries are all dead, those militiamen who took the initiative to participate will immediately disperse." Charles looked at the younger brother of the admiral and said solemnly. Hearing this, Andrew shook his head and immediately vetoed. "No, Charles. Capturing Orleans is the goal of my trip, and I recruited you for this reason." Having said that, he looked at Charles sincerely, and said, "Besides, there are not many defenders in Orleans, and the defenders are already its main force. As long as we persevere, I believe we will be able to capture the city gate soon. By then, Orleans will be in our hands. You don't have to worry about the commission either. I will double the rewards to these brave soldiers after it's done." Hearing this, Charles felt cold in his heart. He knew that the gentleman in front of him wanted his brothers to use their lives to obtain meritorious service for him. The lives of himself and others are like a grass in his heart, and he wants to take the opportunity to leave. For a moment, seeming to see Charles' uneasy mood, Andrew said in a seductive voice, "Charles, I think, if you can capture Orleans, a night must be inevitable." Patting him on the shoulder, Andrew whispered in his ear. As soon as this remark came out, Charles changed his expression and said firmly, "Your Excellency, please give me some time. I think I will definitely be able to break through this city." Then, inspired by Andrew, Charles continued to command the soldiers to seize the city gate. At this time, Admiral Coligny, who led 3,000 cavalry on the road ahead of schedule, had arrived near Orleans, only 6 kilometers away from the city of Orleans. Gradually approaching the city of Orleans, Coligny was slightly confident in breaking Orleans. With 3,000 cavalry, it should be possible to catch it by surprise. Even though he thought so, he didn't know the number of troops stationed in Orleans. If there were too many people, it would be bad. This action is also a gamble. The closer he got to Orleans, the more Coligny felt that something was wrong. When he saw the city wall of Orleans, he suddenly realized that someone was taking the city gate, and at this time, Andrew also saw his brother coming, and hurried up to meet him. After asking about his brother's purpose, Coligny couldn't help being overjoyed that the city of Orleans was in his hands. "Follow me, all warriors, fight for the battle partners ahead, and capture Orleans." Marshal Coligny's voice was extremely provocative, and the cavalry who had driven for a long time were refreshed, and they immediately shook off their mental fatigue and shouted energetically. As for the defenders who had been fighting back and forth, their defense was already very difficult. At this time, they suddenly saw that the enemy had reinforcements, and their morale was drained. Soon, the city of Orleans became the territory of the Huguenots, and also became the political center of the Huguenots. Chapter 441. Troubled France. After the city of Orleans was captured, the Huguenots were in full swing. In the La Boisse area centered on Orleans, they captured a series of cities such as Blois, Tours, and Bourges within 3 weeks. As a result, the Orleans area was completely controlled by the Huguenots, and by controlling the Loire River, the entire France was divided into two. It can be said that Orleans is the capital of French Protestants. On April 12, 1562, in Orleans, Prince Condé officially served as the commander-in-chief of the Huguenot army, with Marshal Coligny and Andrew as his deputy, and began to march towards Paris. The news of Orleans being breached spread quickly, and within a day, it reached Paris. The Catholic League, which was raising funds raised by hand, was outraged when it heard the news. The three giants unanimously decided to counterattack, and then led 15,000 people and began to move towards Orleans. At the same time, Prince Condé, as the commander-in-chief, led the 5,000 people recruited in the Orleans area, followed by 3,000 people, plus 3,000 cavalry, a total of more than 10,000 people marched towards Paris. So, an interesting thing happened. The Duke of Guise led 15,000 people to attack the Orleans area, and Paris only left 3,000 people to defend. Prince Condé led an army of 10,000 towards Paris, leaving only Marshal Coligny and more than 2,000 people to stay in Orleans. What's even more interesting is that before the decisive battle between the two, there was an episode at this time. Queen Catherine, who was in Paris, still enjoyed the honor of Queen Mother on the surface, but she had lost her personal freedom and was no different from a prisoner. I don't know if this situation will remind her of the terrible nightmare of being a hostage in her childhood, but her fear is undoubted. She did not sit still. The terrifying power of the Guise family made her terrified. She began to write letters to Prince Condé, begging him for help. Seeing this situation, I believe you will not refuse to help us. You will protect mother, children, and kingdom. They will never forget your service. At the end of the letter, she specially added a sentence, burn. After reading Commander-in-Chief Huguenot Prince Condé received the letter as if he had found a treasure. Of course, he would not burn the letter, but made it public to prove that the Queen Mother and her son were imprisoned, and called on the people of the country to help him save them. One side of the Catholic triumvirate claimed that they were not responsible for the situation and that the Huguenots were traitors. So before the two sides fought, they had a war of words over the Queen Mother's letter. Just as the two sides were gearing up, they were both on the march, preparing for the war. In terms of diplomacy, on the Protestant side, Andrew sent an envoy to Germany to obtain the support of some Protestant princes. In the United Kingdom, Baron Paragut brought specific conditions for the Huguenots to send troops, requesting to send 6,000 people to the Huguenots. The condition is to get Le Havre, Rouen and Dieppe, that is, the entire Normandy region. Rouen was once the capital of the Duke of Normandy. The Catholic faction did no better than the Protestant faction. They also actively sought foreign aid, and made many concessions to the King of Spain and the Pope. Even the Duke of Savoy, later the Kingdom of Sardinia in Italy, which unified Italy, put forward conditions no less than that of Edward. He asked France to cede Turin, Italy. According to the Cateau-Cambrai Treaty, Turin should belong to France. On May 8, King Charles IX of France formally requested military assistance from the Catholic world, including Spain, the Catholic states of Switzerland, the Catholic princes of Germany, Savoy, the Pope, and the principalities and city-states of Italy. Queen Catherine was very annoyed when she learned that Prince Condé had made the letter public regardless of her life, and now she heard that the Protestants had reached a treaty of treason with Britain, and she was even more furious. She saw clearly that Condé and Guise just as hateful. As she said later, I know them deeply. Apart from pursuing their own interests and the satisfaction of their ambitions, they have no respect and love for the King of God and me. If God is gracious, I will not allow myself to be ordered by anyone. Ironically speaking, Catherine, an Italian, cares more about the honor of France than those native French. But she couldn't know that not only the Protestants, but the Catholic League betrayed the country without mercy. But she didn't know it. In addition to Orleans and Paris, the most intense competition between the Huguenots and the Catholic League belonged to the Normandy region. That's right, the location of the Duke of Normandy title above Edward's head has also become a war zone. The leader of the Huguenots in Normandy was Earl Gabriel, the former captain of the Scottish Guard of the Kingdom. That's right, the knight who stabbed Henry II to death and was forgiven after being pardoned by Henry II. He returned to his domain, which was in the Normandy area. As a result, he was baptized as a Calvinist and became a Protestant. Then, Prince Condé sent his adjutant Marini to act as his assistant. Rouen, the capital of Normandy, was captured by Gabriel, and the Huguenots' adjutant Marigny then took Le Havre, the largest port in Normandy, so that the Huguenots could communicate openly with England. In Seine, Bayeux, and most of Lower Normandy, the populace destroyed the statue of the cathedral, took away the royal tax sent to Paris. The city of Caudebec in Upper Normandy went to the Protestant side. The capture of the cities of Orléans and Rouen made it impossible for the enemy to send anything from the Loire and Seine to Paris. There was no trouble in the Brittany region. Although Catholics accounted for the majority, the Rohan family, descendants of the former Duke of Brittany, believed in Protestantism. They still controlled the entire Brittany region. The departments of Guyenne and Poitou, as well as most of the Languedoc, supported Protestantism. Dauphiné, mostly in support of the Catholic League. A small number of cities in the departments of Burgundy, Champagne, and Bourbon were taken by the Huguenots. Only Ile-de-France fully supports the king, and if you count the Lorraine area, there are two areas that fully support Catholicism. Generally speaking, the Huguenots and the Catholic League are evenly matched, and it even seems that Catholicism is stronger. Not long after Le Havre was captured by Protestantism, Knight Alexander led an army of 7,000 men and hundreds of ships, and gradually approached the port of Le Havre. General, do you need help from our navy? Colonel James, as the captain of the fleet in the English Channel, naturally had to personally escort the army to Normandy, which was his due responsibility. Looking at the port of Le Havre not far away, James bent slightly and greeted softly. Although he is a baron, his status is still not as good as that of Alexander, a knight who was trusted and favored by 2 generations of kings. So, there was a hint of compliment in his voice. No need, Mr. Colonel, leave the siege to army. The sea is where your navy should be in charge. Knight Alexander looked at the looming port in front of him, narrowed his beautiful eyes slightly, moved his lips lightly, and said in a nonchalant manner, which made Colonel James a soft nail in this regard. Colonel James could only smile a few times, shook his head, and said nothing more. People in the army are still so arrogant. It is a shame to say that the navy at this time has made a lot of achievements, while the army not only suppressed Scotland, but also sent troops to Ireland, and its status was higher than that of the navy. I was stunned, and there was nothing to say. Chapter 442 Preliminary Foothold. After rejecting Colonel James' proposal, Knight Alexander raised his head and looked towards the increasingly clear outline of Le Havre port. The knight aimed the binoculars at his left eye, and looked at the vast sea in front of him, as well as the wharf where many merchant ships were moored. However, what made him unbelievable was that the port of Le Havre suddenly became much quieter today, and there were only a few ships sailing and docking there, which was completely unreasonable. Didn't you say that the port of Le Havre is one of the most prosperous ports in France? Why is it so quiet today? A trace of temptation could not help but appear in the knight's heart. His handsome eyebrows were slightly frowned, and his whole face inexplicably showed a pitiful expression, which made Major James' heartbeat beating again and again. The arrival of hundreds of warships made the port of Le Havre feel vigilant. Dang dang dang, vigilant gongs and drums rang around the port pier. Merchants, laborers, and various vendors left the dock one by one in fear, and walked quickly towards a safe place to save their lives. The army at the port came to the city wall in a hurry and panic. The artillery was in position and began to aim, while other soldiers stood on the wall, waiting for orders. If you look carefully, you will find that the soldiers in these ports did not wear the uniforms of the French army. Instead, they looked like militiamen, with all kinds of fancy clothes and strange things. The weapons in their hands are relatively uniform: spears, matchlock guns, bows and arrows, but judging from their trembling legs, these people are inexperienced. My lord, please look, there is a large wave of warships ahead, aggressive. Le Havre is in danger. On the side, a man with a big belly pointed at the British fleet that gradually appeared in front of him, opened his mouth in surprise, and said worriedly, ha ha ha. Marini, who was standing in the center with a telescope in his hand, stroked his messy beard and laughed loudly. Don't worry, this is the English, the army of the Protestant country, here to help us deal with a group of Catholics. When he saw the flags fluttering on the ship through the telescope, Marini's tight heart slowly let go. As the adjutant of Prince Condé, he certainly knows something that others don't. For example, in order to borrow troops from the English, the big 3 Huguenots did not hesitate to sell the Normandy region to the English. Of course, the premise was that the Catholic League failed. Therefore, these days he has been suppressing the Catholics in the city, while making a lot of money confiscate the property of Catholic merchants and civilians, and request the city hall to allocate special funds to maintain the military expenses of the Protestant army. Once the English come, the situation in France will definitely change drastically. This is the English fleet and our reinforcements. Send someone to deliver the message quickly, so as not to cause unnecessary misunderstanding. Marini quickly ordered to the pot-bellied Mr. Mayor. Yes, sir. Although he is the mayor, his status is still inferior compared to the actual control of Le Havre port in front of him. Then, in a joyous atmosphere, Knight Alexander and a group of army soldiers boarded the territory of France and arrived at the port of Le Havre. Hello, Monsieur Chevalier, welcome to Le Havre. Hello, Your Excellency. Knight Alexander replied somewhat bluntly. Afterwards, on behalf of the forces behind them, the two had a friendly and cordial discussion with their big brother's opinion, and the two reached the following agreement. First, the English army cannot burn, kill, loot and maintain order in the Normandy area. Second, the French side provided £50,000 as an early reward fee, which will depend on the outcome of the battle. Third, the British army can only reasonably occupy Normandy after expelling all the Catholic League troops. Fourth, after the end of the Normandy War, the British army can cooperate with the Protestant army to attack the Catholic League under reasonable circumstances. Fifth, Le Havre must be occupied by the British army. As the rear of the army, it is also a retreat. The agreement stipulates a series of conditions, which have requirements for both Protestantism and England, but compared with the occupation of Normandy, these conditions are not a problem. On the second day after the signing of the agreement, the Knights of Alexander, who had a day off, began to divide the army into 3 regiments, about 2,600 people each, and began to attack those cities that still belonged to the Catholic League in batches. In April, the saying goes throughout Normandy, "The king in England is back." Many Catholic nobles scoffed, but the ignorant Protestants were ecstatic. They naively believed that the English were here to support them. The Brittany region is located on the Brittany Peninsula in northwestern France, between the English Channel and the Bay of Biscay. The capital is Rennes. If we say that Brittany is the most impressive, only the Rose Coast, the pink coast between Brest and Rennes, located in the north of Brittany, is called the Rose Coast. Such a romantic name is not out of imagination, but in this area, you can see many rose-red granites scattered on the coast, and the strange-shaped stones form a very special landscape. Walking on these beautiful rocks and looking carefully, you will find that these stones do not show a romantic rose color under the sun, but the stone itself is faintly pink, and it also spreads a little light as mentioned above. Brittany was immigrated by the Celts, speaking customs and language, which is very different from other places in France. Therefore, in this expedition, the Duke of Edinburgh took most of the Scots, which can effectively downplay the face of the conqueror and make it easier to capture the Brittany region. The port of Brest is the largest port in the Brittany region. The merchants who come and go basically shuttle between England and Brittany for business, so instead of French being spoken throughout the city, Celtic and a close relative of English are spoken. It was just dawn, and the guards got up early in the morning, yawned helplessly, opened their sleepy eyes, and started the day's work at this time. The gate of the city was a little different from usual, but suddenly there were more people, and the queue to enter the city became stronger and stronger. A city guard looked at the team below who took turns paying money to enter the city, and was curious in his heart, and said to his friend beside him, "How come there are so many people traveling recently?" But the partner on the side looked at the little soldier who asked the question with a look of contempt, and said in an envious tone, "Recently, the price of everything has risen due to the war in France. Many merchants went to England to buy goods and then sold them in France. They really made a lot of money, although decades after joining France, most Bretons still regard France as a foreign country." Chapter 443, Persuading to Surrender. That was the case with my uncle, who made a trip to England and France, and earned 100 livres, which is admirable. The guard glanced at the endless stream of pedestrians and vendors, then at himself and his companions, and said enviously. Ralph led 2 servants behind him, a groom pulled a carriage, and the 4 of them lined up silently, just like ordinary traders, inconspicuous 3 sous. The guard said directly after looking at the 3 of them and then at the goods on the carriage, "The basic unit of French currency is the livre and the franc in parallel. Each livre is equivalent to 1 pound, and the sou is equivalent to a shilling, and the conversion units are similar." Why did the price suddenly increase? 3 silver coins, at that time, was the annual income of ordinary farmers excluding taxes. Such a huge figure made Ralph stretch his neck and argue, "Yes, isn't this killing people? I'm going to sue the city hall." Too high. When the other people heard the number, they also became indignant and shouted in unison, "What's the noise?" The guard picked up his spear and waved it towards the sky. "Recently, the kingdom is not at peace. The increased money is all to suppress robbers and bandits. Besides, for you businessmen, charging you 3 sous is already considered cheap." I'm still not satisfied. A ruthless look appeared on the guard's face, and he shouted loudly. When the merchants saw the spear in the soldier's hand and the other guards behind him who were about to move, they quickly suppressed their voices. For a while, the air immediately froze. After speaking, the guard looked at Ralph playfully, and stretched out his hand. Seeing this, Ralph reluctantly took out 3 silver coins from his pocket, handed them to the guards, and walked into the city of Brest sullenly. The guard gave him a sneering glance and went on with his business of collecting taxes. As the gateway and largest port of Brittany, the prosperity of Brest is also counted in the whole of France, but for Ralph, who has already seen the prosperity of London, it is no longer worth his fuss. According to the usual steps, Ralph took the cartload of white paper he brought to a familiar warehouse, negotiated a good price, and then sold it. In this way, although the profit is a lot, the profit is still considerable, and it also saves time. The time to go to France is enough for him to go to England again. The 2 guys wandered around, followed Ralph's pace, looked at the environment and crowds on the street curiously, and then watched the process of Ralph negotiating prices with the merchants. Afterwards, the 2 were brought home by Ralph, put on high-end sackcloth, put on makeup, and transformed themselves from fellows into 2 nobles. "Really? That sackcloth is so uncomfortable to wear. My skin is getting red." One of the nobles, with fair skin and delicate facial features, opened his sleeves and complained as he watched his arms scratched with red bumps from the sackcloth. On the other side, another nobleman was tall and well-shaped. giving the impression of a military general. These are trivial matters, don't worry about them. The burly nobleman glanced at his reddened arm and said angrily, Mr. Ralph, when can we go see the mayor? He raised his head and asked Ralph, who was slightly bent and respectful. Dear Baron Gavin, if nothing unexpected happens, you can see Mr. Mayor this afternoon. Please wait a moment. Ralph quickly reacted and replied softly, that's good. Now please, prepare some food for us. Ralph repeatedly agreed, and then consciously left the room, leaving it to the two barons. I don't know if this Mr. Ralph is reliable. Can he take us to meet the mayor of Brest? Baron Jean rubbed his delicate arm distressedly, looked at Ralph's leaving figure, and said softly, it should be possible. Baron Gavin squinted his eyes, looked at the closed door, and said with the corners of his mouth curled up, after all, this Mr. Ralph was recommended by His Majesty's famous dark blade. If something happens, His Majesty will not spare them. Well, Baron Guise thought for a while and laughed out loud. You are right, His Majesty the King will definitely not spare them. Speaking of which, tell me, this time the two of us volunteered to negotiate with the mayor. Is there a high chance of success? Looking at Baron Gavin, who was full of confidence and held his head high, Baron Jean was still a little unconfident and said doubtfully. Baron Gavin turned his eyes around, seeing that the various sculptures and ornaments in the room in front of him, as well as the architectural style, were similar to his hometown in Scotland. He couldn't help but click his lips, feeling very emotional. Sure enough, the Bretons are of the same race as us. Baron Jean's question came from his ear, but he didn't answer it, but said, this is a rare opportunity for us. As long as you convince the mayor, the army can take Brest and reach Rennes without hindrance. Half of Brittany will be in your hands at that time. The two of us will have a great contribution. Although it is impossible to be promoted to Viscount, it is certain to be in the eyes of His Majesty the King. Speaking of this, Baron Gavin's eyes revealed a look of expectation, as did Baron Jean on the side. Sure enough, this Mr. Ralph was very well connected. In the afternoon, the two of them rode in a carriage to the mayor's mansion and were received. The two Lord Barons have come to Brest. What is your business? The mayor is an unsmiling person, with a square face and a short curly beard on his chin. He looks very upright. Baron Gavin didn't care about such a tough question, smiled, and explained lightly, Mr. Mayor, we are here to make you and your family prosperous. What do you mean by that? The mayor moved his eyes slightly, and then asked abruptly, the co-lord of England and Scotland, the monarch of Wales and Ireland, His Majesty Edward asked me to come and bring you a hereditary title and territory of a baron. I don't know if Mr. Mayor is satisfied. Looking at the pretentious mayor, Baron Gavin was a little disgusted. He knew this kind of people very well. As long as the interests were large enough, they could break through their masks, especially for a businessman like him who is extremely eager for aristocratic status. The mayor bowed his head in silence for a moment, so that people could not see his eyes clearly, and asked calmly, what can I do for His Majesty the King? Hearing this gentle and soft question, Baron Gavin straightened his face and said directly, Your Excellency the Mayor, what His Majesty the King exchanged with you is only this city, Brest. What does His Majesty the King want it for? The mayor suddenly turned pale with fright and asked hastily, not only Brest, but the whole of Brittany will be the territory of His Majesty the King. As he spoke, Baron Gavin raised his chin and said with a proud look on his face, I am not telling lies. In another day, tens of thousands of troops from London will go straight to Brest and take this port city, then go directly to Rennes and take it in one fell swoop, thus occupying the entire Brittany. The reason why you persuaded the mayor to surrender is just to save time. Does the mayor think that Brest, which is defended by more than 1,000 people, can withstand an army of tens of thousands? Hearing this, the mayor was in a mess, and after a while, he said decisively, I am willing to serve His Majesty Edward. Baron Gavin and Baron Jean looked at each other and couldn't help but smile. Chapter 444, Breaking into Brest. The Marquis of Edinburgh was originally an earl, and later he was canonized as Marquis of Edinburgh by His Majesty Edward because of the capture of Edinburgh. Guarding Edinburgh for a long time made Wilson have a special love for Scotch whiskey, so this time, he led 3,000 soldiers to conquer Brittany, and brought hundreds of barrels of whiskey among them. The one that fascinates him the most is the Scottish specialty, chicken nuggets with cheese. This is chicken cubes marinated in special ingredients and cooked in whiskey. Scotch whiskey is the best in the world, and Glenfiddich malt whiskey is the best in Scotch whiskey, known as liquid gold. Like him, most of the soldiers from Scotland also regarded whiskey as life, and clamored that they would rather have no weapons than whiskey in order to ensure morale. The logistics team endured tears and bought 100 barrels of Scotch whiskey, which cost several £100. So, at this moment, the Scottish soldiers sitting on the ship, bored during the day, sat on the deck one by one, wearing characteristic kilts, drinking strong whiskey, playing bagpipes, and the waves beat from time to time. The whole ship, presents a harmonious scene different from the Scottish plaid group in everyone's impression. Scotland at this time is just a long skirt, called kilt. Kilted is still a kind of uncut clothing, about 5 meters long, wrapped around a person, with a belt tied around the waist to achieve the purpose of covering the body. The part below the waist is similar to the current kilt, but the part above the waist is pleated with pins on the shoulders. The Scottish skirt in the modern sense will not be until the early 18th century on the battlefield. Scottish soldiers wore kilts as formal clothing. This kind of skirt is generally made of tweed, and the cloth surface is designed as a continuous grid, and the grid must be fully displayed. It later evolved into the less trimmed little gilt, also known as the Friedberg, which was sewn along the waist pleats. When wearing this kind of skirt, an oval-shaped scarf should be worn in front and a wide belt should be tied. Moreover, the squares on the kilt cannot be worn randomly. Each square represents a different meaning. For example, black and grey boxes represent government officials the Scottish Highland tribes fought, and the way to distinguish them was to identify the squares on the skirts with eyes closed, listening to the melodious Scottish bagpipes, enjoying the gentle sea breeze. The Marquis of Edinburgh felt a little overwhelmed for a while. However, he had no choice but to get up, because there were hurried footsteps next to his ears. "What's the matter? Tell me." Sitting up, the Marquis of Edinburgh said directly without even looking at the messenger. "Starting yesterday, the ship began to slow down. More than 4,000 soldiers, including the navy, saw the seagulls constantly surpassing themselves, and the sea was calm and peaceful, which made them panic." The same is true for the Marquis of Edinburgh. He originally planned to take down the city of Brest in one go, but he had to temporarily change his plan because of His Majesty's letter and Dark Blade's guarantee. Moreover, 2 Scottish nobles were lost. The messenger swallowed his saliva, blinked his eyes, and said calmly and quickly, "A letter from Dark Blade, from Brest. Oh? Really? Show me." The Marquis of Edinburgh quickly took the letter and opened it to read. As he read the contents step by step, the smile on his face deepened, and finally he couldn't stop, and the wrinkles on his face turned into a chrysanthemum. "Quickly, notify the navy and let them speed up. They must arrive at the port of Brest before evening. By the way, notify everyone to prepare immediately. Dress up and let me see the dirty ones, and throw them directly into the sea, so as not to lose me's face." The last few words, the Marquis of Edinburgh spoke loudly, and all the soldiers on the deck could hear them clearly. "You have to take care of your body cleanliness, that's right. The general is too lenient." There was a lot of discussion, but the Marquis of Edinburgh turned a blind eye and let them complain. While the soldiers complained, they kept moving and began to prepare. A group of lazy people only look like a mighty army if the army is clean and tidy, and have a great deterrent effect. Muttering the words from His Majesty the King, the Marquis felt that he also needed to take a bath. Looking at the sea surface and feeling his sticky skin again, Lord Marquis hurriedly walked into the cabin and started a cleaning campaign. It is clearly stipulated in the compiled joint infantry drills that soldiers must take a bath every 3 days to clean their environment while drifting at sea. Many soldiers have no conditions to take a bath and clean, but now that the task is almost completed, of course they can take a bath to their heart's content. So, under the amazed eyes of the Navy sailors, the Army soldiers took the precious freshwater resources and took extravagant bathing exercises, envious and jealous. Which is beyond words. In the evening, the Navy arrived at the port of Brest as promised, and the Marquis of Edinburgh also met the Mayor of Brest. Then, under the welcome of the Mayor, the Royal Army, dressed in clothing similar to that of the Bretons, entered the city of Brest, and sent troops to occupy the gates of the entire city, and sent additional personnel to patrol. Only at this time did the city council learn of the contents of the mayor's rebellion, but the nobles and big businessmen who had close contacts with England kept silent about it for a long time. As a result, the entire city successfully accepted all the city gates. As a result, this wonderful performance made Dark Blade famous, gradually gaining the momentum to keep pace with the palace intelligence service. In the end, the mayor also learned that the army in front of him was only 3,000 people, and what Baron Gavin said was all bluffing. But when things got to this point, there was nothing to do but admit it. The news that Brest City was occupied by the British soon spread to Rennes. The Luoang family panicked immediately. As the descendants of the former Duke of Brittany, the entire Rohan family still controls the entire Brittany, living a life of wine and mead. Although the King of France married the Grand Duchess Anna, the King of France did not have so much energy to take care of it in view of the high mountains in Brittany, the barren land, and the backward economy. More importantly, in order to stabilize Brittany, keep it stable, restrain pro-British forces, and prevent Brittany from falling to England. The collateral Rohan family, appointed by the King of France, still rules the land of Brittany. The Rohan family is the uncrowned king of Brittany. The sudden arrival of the Englishmen disrupted the rhythm of life of the entire Rohan family. Chapter 445. The Rohan family. The Brittany region originally belonged to the Duchess Anna, who was then forced to marry Charles VIII, and finally Louis VIII gave birth to his only daughter, Claude, who married Francois I and gave birth to Henry II. Therefore, the last generation of dukes should be King Henry II of France. In this way, the main branch of the Rohan family is broken, and a new main branch is bound to be needed. After all, the Rohan family has ruled Brittany for hundreds of years and has many branches. As a result, the branch located in Montbazon was able to take over due to blood relationship factors, and successfully changed from the branch to the main branch, which is a great leap. However, the resulting consequences are also very bad because it is the upper branch of the branch. It does not have the kind of pride and confidence from the heart of the main branch in the past. It seriously lacks prestige and leadership for other branches, so it can only choose to discuss. Rosslyn has always been the fiefdom of the Rohan family, and the Jocelyn Castle, which has been constantly decorated for hundreds of years, is also the location of the main branch of the Rohan family, and it is also the blood center that the Rohan family has always recognized in their hearts at this time. In Fort Josephine, the round candlesticks hanging on the wall in the hall were already full of candles. Even the candlesticks in the center of the sky were no exception. A long table is placed in the center, and Louis Rohan, who is the main branch, sits on the seats listlessly. A dozen other clan chiefs with relatively high reputation and prestige are sitting at the long table, with different faces. This scene looks similar to the last luncheon. Mural is very similar, and those branch patriarchs with no reputation and low status can only sit in the back and listen. Even though the memory hall is very large, it still looks crowded after hundreds of people are seated. Having ruled Brittany for hundreds of years, the Rohan family has a huge branch, and they don't have to worry about cutting off their bloodlines. Even in the period of the French Revolution, the Rohan family was still active, and even in the Napoleon period, there was a Marshal Rohan. Even in the 21st century, the Rohan family is still active in French politics. This is another plenary meeting of the Rohan family after the last meeting to elect the succession of the main branch. It is grand and meaningful. The servants served the wine carefully, with strict rules. Since it was a great aristocrat who had been passed down for hundreds of years, everyone's words and actions were extremely standard. Before Louis Rohan spoke, the whole hall seemed quiet. Everyone, I just got the news that the English have captured the city of Brest unexpectedly, and have an army of tens of thousands. Today, the Rohan family has reached a critical moment of life and death. Please speak freely. As soon as the young Louis' words fell to the ground, the whole hall suddenly chattered and discussed, and he didn't stop it. The reason why it is unexpected is that the capture of Brest city was really not what they expected. After all, the port closest to the capital, Rennes, is St. Roch, and next to St. Roch are all the Channel Islands in England. The islands centered on Guernsey and Naxi. This is the heritage of the Duchy of Normandy, just 10 miles from France. Therefore, although the city of Brest is prosperous, the island with the most military value is St. Rocco Island. Therefore, a large part of Brittany's military power is in the port of St. Roch. The most important thing is that after capturing the city of Brest, although the distance is relatively long, the embarrassing thing is that there are no relatively strong castles along the way. Basically, there is no obstruction and the force is very small. And you can directly reach the city of Rennes. Tens of thousands of British troops. The effect of propaganda. If they act quickly, it only takes 7 or 8 days to reach the city of Rennes. My lord, the tens of thousands of English troops, with our strength of a few thousand people, cannot defend it. Let's just surrender. A branch patriarch, who looked mighty, unexpectedly uttered cowardly words, which surprised people. That's true. There is no doubt about the strength of the English. With the strength of our Bretons, we can't beat them. It's better to surrender. Other branches also supported and agreed to surrender. It can be seen that England has cultivated a lot of power in Brittany for hundreds of years. After all, the exchanges between the two places are extensive. No, absolutely not. A gentleman dressed as a branch shook his head and refused. Now, the English are coming in menacingly, and they may annex us in one fell swoop. Brittany belongs to a Rohan family, and the Tudor family will never succeed. The Rohan family is the master of Brittany, and the English will never be allowed to occupy it. Behind him, there are also many branches supporting him. As for Louis Rohan, who was sitting on the main seat, the titular patriarch of the family, he was a little embarrassed at this moment, and the scene was a little out of control. Ahem. Quiet everyone, be quiet. He rolled his eyes a few times and said loudly it was only when he saw that all eyes were on him that he felt that he was the real patriarch of the Luoyang family. Based on our current situation, we can't deal with the English at all, but the French are engaged in a civil war. Simply, we evacuate to the border castle. The border castle is a castle built by Grand Duchess Anna and her father on the Buffa border to maintain the autonomy of Brittany. More importantly, it is very close to France, and France can be withdrawn if necessary. This proposal was unanimously approved by everyone, and they all expressed their satisfaction. Subsequently, most of the branches drove back home and started the Great Migration. The reason why the Roon family is unwilling to be occupied by the English is not only their own long-term self-government thoughts, but also their beliefs. Most Bretons believe in Catholicism, while the Rohan family believes in Protestantism. Ordinary people, of course, thought that the English were Protestants. But they, the nobles, knew very well that Anglicanism had little to do with Protestantism, but was very similar to Catholicism. This is why they resisted the English. But in real history, these Protestant Rohan families made the wrong bet and were forced to cut nearly half of their fiefdoms, causing heavy losses. Contrary to what the Rohan family had guessed, it took about half a month before the British army arrived at the city of Rennes. The reason for this is the fault of alcohol. More than 100 barrels of whiskey were consumed in a few days, and the journey was only halfway through. In order to stabilize the morale of the army, the Marquess of Edinburgh had no choice but to plunder the wine cellars of some manors to supplement. It is against the rules to plunder the property of nobles. Therefore, after each plunder, the Marquess of Edinburgh left an IOU, walking and drinking all the way. And the time was doubled. More importantly, the number of opened wine cellars has reached hundreds. The amount of IOUs he left has reached tens of thousands of pounds. Therefore, looking at the tall city of Rennes in front of him, what he thought about was not how to capture it, but how to make great achievements so that it would be difficult for London to settle accounts with him. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446, Normandy Crisis. Just when Rennes, the capital of Brittany, was approached by the British army, Rouen, the capital of the Normandy region, was also facing the same situation. In other words, the Knights of Alexander divided the British army into 3 regiments, and together they captured the entire Normandy region. Although some cities in the Normandy area have changed their flags, they have been managed by Protestants after a new look. But vast rural areas, as well as most of the cities, remained loyal to the king and on the side of the Catholic League. As a result, the British army divided its forces and swept across the entire Normandy region, almost all cities and rural areas west of Rouen. With the help of the British army, they seized the rule. In other words, most of the Normandy region has been separated from the Catholic Church. In this way, the Duke of Guise, who was attacking the city of Orleans, was very annoyed. Protestant attempts, of course, he understood as long as the Normandy area is captured, the Catholic League will be attacked from both sides. That is to say, Paris will not only be unable to transport supplies from the Loire River and Seine River to Paris, but will face the danger of being attacked by the Huguenots and the British army on both sides. In this way, the Duke of Guise could not sit still. After unloading the heavy task of attacking the city of Orleans, he hurried to the Paris area and the central area, no longer caring about the Huguenots' attack on Paris, but directly led thousands of troops, and tens of thousands of temporary recruits, to attack the city. Rouen. Although Paris has great political significance, both the Queen Mother and the King were transferred to the countryside. In addition, Paris has always been the stronghold of Catholicism, with a high city and many soldiers, which is much more difficult than Orleans. Therefore, it is better to drag the main force of the Huguenots in Paris. Therefore, after the Duke of Guise came to Rouen in a hurry, he directly surrounded the capital of Normandy. Count Gabriel, who was guarding the city, was definitely a true Protestant. Even though there were only more than 4,000 troops in the city, he still refused to surrender, and sent people to deliver a letter, asking for the support of Alexander's knights outside Rouen. The tens of thousands of troops led by the Duke of Guise surrounded the city of Rouen, and artillery bombarded the entire city continuously. Although Rouen, led by the Earl of Gabriel, has sufficient supplies and small arms, it lacks enough cannons and gunpowder. How to confront the Duke of Guise's cannons can only be passively beaten. The time came to June of 1562, a week after the siege of Rouen. A fortress in the city of Rouen was finally breached. Immediately, the people in the city were panicked, and the voices of peace were endless in this regard. Earl Garibald immediately summoned the officials and generals in the city to speak and continue to explain his views. Gentlemen, at present, although the Duke of Guise has besieged Rouen, as Protestants, we should uphold God's will and stick to this city. Looking at the faces of these people, Count Garibald continued, Catholics can't bring us to our knees and absolutely can't change our faith. God bless us. After he finished speaking, a pious smile appeared on his face, while the other listeners seemed to be cheered up, and they were also full of energy and pious also. The English are already gathering troops and are gathering towards us. As long as we stand firm, the English will rescue us in a few days and join us to defeat the Duke of Guise. With the addition of faith and the message of rescue, this restored the audience's confidence a little. The breach of a fortress did not make them surrender. Historically, the British were unwilling to participate too much in the French Civil War. Of course, the main reason was that Elizabeth I was eager to stabilize her throne, and the debt-ridden treasury did not allow it. In the absence of support from the British, Count Gabriel stayed in Rouen for a month before the city was broken. Outside the city, the Duke of Guise was holding a telescope, observing the city wall of Rouen, thinking about the fighter. Although it took a week to break through a fortress in the city of Rouen, the price paid was very high. More than 2,000 French soldiers were killed and injured. If this continues and the city of Rouen is captured, more than half of the entire army will be killed or injured, which is not in line with his estimation. Looking at the Rouen soldiers on the wall, they drove the French troops who had ascended the city down the city continuously, and they were determined and showed no sign of flinching. This made the Duke of Guise's head hurt a little. Antoine, do you have any means to capture this city? Looking at the Duke of Vendôme next to him, the Duke of Guise greeted cordially. Generally speaking, when addressing nobles, one cannot directly address them by their first names. Only people who are close to them can call them by their names, and the Duke of Guise's move is just to win him over and show his closeness. The Kingdom of Navarre is a vassal state of France, so although it is also a king, it is still the Duke of Vendôme in France and owns the territory of Vendôme. In France, it is generally called the Duke of Vendôme. Antoine de Naval, also known as Antoine de Bourbon, his son is Henry IV, the founder of the French Bourbon dynasty in history. Although he was the leader of the Huguenots at the beginning, he immediately changed his flag and became a member of the Catholic Church after the Duke of Guise aggressively captured the central region. So, at this moment, the Duke of Guise also brought him to Rouen to capture the capital of the Normandy region. Together the voice of the Duke of Guise came from next to his ear, and Antoine quickly raised his head to meet the friendly gaze of the Duke of Guise. After thinking for a while, he shook his head and said helplessly, "My lord, Rouen is guarded by the king's lair. He has a strong will to defend. In addition, the city is basically full of Huguenots, so it cannot be easily captured. We can only attack by force." "Really? That's the only way to go. I'm just afraid that the English will come to help." After not getting the answer he expected, the Duke of Guise was not very disappointed. He only looked at Rouen with an ugly face, and said at the same time, "In the city of Seymour, 200 miles away from Rouen, Knight Alexander received a distress letter from Rouen in this regard. Mr. Knight received the messenger very kindly, and after learning the purpose, he expressed regret that there was nothing he could do at this time. He prevaricated by using insufficient food, grass and gunpowder as an excuse, but he said that he could send 500 cavalry to support. In desperation, the messenger had no choice but to take 500 cavalry and headed towards Rouen. After the messenger left, Knight Alexander looked at the map of France and couldn't help but fell into deep thought. He has his own ideas about saving the city of Rouen. After learning that the morale of the city of Rouen was high, and that more than 2,000 French troops were killed or injured in a fortress, Knight Alexander prepared to delay the rescue time and let the Duke of Guise and the city of Rouen confront each other for a while. There are two reasons. One is because the Duke of Guise has a strong army, and the British army is not enough to fight him recklessly. The second is because, taking into account the situation in the Normandy area after the victory of this battle, the Protestants are too powerful, which is not conducive to the rule of England, so it is better to consume some. The best rescue time is when Rouen is about to break down. Chapter 447. Brittany got it. There was good news from both Brittany and Normandy, which rejoiced throughout the cabinet, and there was cheer in the palace. But Her Majesty the King is not on the palace, but is heading for the suburbs of London in a carriage. The morning glow in the sky flooded with patches of blush, soaking the entire sky, making the sun's sense of existence weaken a lot, and the breeze was blowing, and summer seemed to have turned into spring, which was gentle and pleasant, making people very comfortable sitting on the carriage. The soft goose down cushion made Edward's buttocks feel as if they had landed on the clouds, without feeling tired or uncomfortable. The carriage is very large and closed. The most impressive thing is that the huge cushion occupies nearly 3/4 of the area. In other words, Edward can sit or lie down without restraint in the middle. There is a small round table with an area of about 1 square meter. The paint is dyed light yellow, and a whole piece of round transparent glass is inlaid on the surface of the round table. Under the glass, English artists carved all kinds of myths and legends. Among them, the one in the middle is not a picture of God and his son, but a woman. One wears an ancient Roman centurion helmet and a white ancient Roman toga, sitting on a throne on a rock, holding a spear and a shield, and looks like a king. This is the goddess Britannia, patron saint of the British Isles. The Romans set England and Wales as the province of Britannia, and the area north of Hadrian's Wall was called Caledonia by the Romans as a patroness goddess. She naturally won the favor of the British, especially the English. Therefore, at Edward's request, the British goddess appeared in his carriage as a united kingdom. One faith, Anglican, one king, one weights and measures, is not enough to unite everyone. Only if these places have endlessly involved common genes, then the possibility of splitting the United Kingdom is very slim. Therefore, the patroness of Britannia is another common gene convinced by His Majesty Edward on the basis of tradition. On the desk, there are books that His Majesty likes and the memorials drafted by the cabinet. The snow-white paper is loaded with countless words, piled up into 2 hills, occupying half of the desk. The other half belongs to the fruit and snacks. Again, shortbread, wine, apples, grapes, and bananas were neatly arranged, waiting for His Majesty's favor. Beside the desk, there are 2 young and beautiful maids sitting on their knees. Their clothes reveal their sides, full of youth and love, swinging seductive poses from time to time, exuding the unique body fragrance of young girls, pure, tempting the energetic heart of the young king. But Edward didn't take them in. Rabbits don't eat grass by the side of the nest, and people around them should pay attention to their appearance. Except for Emma, he never touched the maid again. The second point is that as a king, seeing too many beautiful girls will inevitably lead to aesthetic fatigue. Even if he is tempted for a while, he will be tasteless in the future, and abandonment is inevitable. And Edward didn't think he was that kind of person, but the instinct of a man was like this. In order to avoid this kind of situation, the best way is to be restrained. Just treat them as vases, usually seductive and seductive, take advantage of it, and let the rest be left alone. When it comes to handmaidens, the Edwardian period is very different from the previous era. First of all, some departments of the palace are no longer managed by noble ladies, but are specially selected from the orphan camp. In this way, the palace will no longer be a sieve for air leakage as it used to be, and many information will no longer be disclosed, and the secrecy will be enhanced. It is no longer like in the past, when the king has any embarrassing things, he becomes the focus of heated discussions among London citizens. Protecting the king's authority. After being the king for so many years, Edward concluded that maintaining a moderate sense of mystery is a favorable condition for maintaining the supremacy of the king. To use an old Chinese saying, if the ruler does not keep secrets, he will lose his ministers. If the ministers do not keep secrets, he will lose his integrity. Historically, Louis V of France in the 18th century, the unlucky guy who went to the guillotine, failed to keep secrets, so no matter what he and the queen did, it would be spread to Paris, and then spread throughout France. For example, Louis V liked making locks more than governing, and often made all kinds of locks. Now, it spread outside the palace, and the majesty of the king was completely lost. The majesty of the royal family was completely lost, and those nobles who knew the king made traps step by step to lure him into it, and finally the family became ghosts under the knife. The nobles left the court and made the court a royal family's private land again, which greatly contributed to the authority of the king. This had an additional consequence. The maids of court were fawned upon by nobles and officials after the nobles left the court and could not obtain information from His Majesty the King. They could only turn to the maids in the palace to obtain the information they needed. But as long as it is well prevented and has the right to dispose of the maid, the sequelae are very simple. Thinking of these from the 2 maids, Edward couldn't help shaking his head, feeling a little funny. This way of enjoying myself is really boring. The warm wind blowing on his face made Edward feel a little drowsy. Rubbing his eyes, he stuck his head out of the window, glanced at the wide national road and the flow of people, and then laid down. And the pretty maid beside her had a blush on her face. She gently placed Edward's head on her slender and plump thigh. Her hands felt like massaging the king's shoulders. The other took out a blanket, covered Edward's body, and tidied up his desk and cushion. After an unknown amount of time, Edward was woken up in a daze. When he opened his eyes, he saw a pretty girl gently shaking his arm, and the other whispered softly, "Your Majesty, Your Majesty, what's wrong?" Edward opened his mouth and asked, rubbing his sleepy eyes, "There is a messenger outside the car asking to see you." The maid said softly, "Messenger? Bring the letter in." Edward thought for a while. The most important thing at present is the war in France. The kingdom is already at peace, and there is no possibility of any riots breaking out. The maid obediently left the carriage and brought on the letter, only to see that the cabinet's seal was stamped on the cover. I took it apart without any scruples, and found about 100 words. The content was very brief, and there was only one sentence in the summary: Brittany has been captured. Very good. Great. Edward couldn't help but shouted with joy, which surprised the two maids. What news made the king so happy? Go, bring a bottle of wine and give it to the messenger. Edward stared at the letter, looked at it repeatedly, and then ordered. Then, out of breath, the messenger suddenly felt lucky. God bless, sending a letter was actually rewarded by His Majesty the King. This book is in the late stage, and I have also started to prepare a new book, so I can only update it every day. I hope everyone understands. Chapter 448, Royal Academy of Sciences. The courier held a bottle of wine from France in his hand, looking at the intoxicating red color, under the sunlight, revealing a charm that seduces the soul. It's not just wine, it's glory. Suddenly, a sick flush appeared on his face, his eyes rolled up, and he smirked, giving off a feeling of witchcraft. Just when the guards were about to start checking on the young messenger, he suddenly woke up. God bless my king! He shouted excitedly, saluted, mounted his horse with a smirk, and left. The guards stared dumbfounded at the messenger leaving, and glanced at their companions, at each other, eyes full of envy. This is wine from France. Even they can only look at it. It is difficult for ordinary nobles to taste it, let alone ordinary people. This bottle of wine can't be sold in the market without hundreds of pounds. Envy, jealousy, and hatred are what they think in their hearts. At this moment in the carriage, Edward reread the victory letter. His ecstatic expression gradually subsided, and only a faint smile remained from the perspective of the maid at the side. The faint smile on the king's face, combined with the shallow beard on his chin, coupled with his admirable power, made his every move full of strong male hormones. Looking at it like this, the two maids unconsciously became excited, and the field suddenly became slippery. With sweet smiles on their faces, the sound of da-da-da horseshoes was full of rhythm. In Edward's eyes, it sounded like a drumbeat, which made him feel more anxious. This trip, the main reason why I came out of London, was to visit the Royal Academy of Sciences and check the scientific research results. Speaking of the Royal Academy of Sciences, this is a scientific research institute established by Edward not far from Windsor Castle, near the River Thames. The so-called Institute of Scientific Research is an institution where Edward recruited a group of scientists in the name of the royal family to conduct scientific research. In fact, in the 16th century, there were no real scientists because the church controlled the university. The famous scholars of this era were basically theologians. For example, Nicola Copernicus, the greatest scientist in the 16th century, who wrote on the movement of celestial spheres, and the first scientist who put forward a hypothesis of heliocentric theory, was a devout Catholic who was born in Poland. In his masterpiece, The Movement of the Celestial Spheres, an introduction, he wrote, "If there is a science that can ennoble the human mind and free it from the taint of time, it must be astronomy, because when human beings really see all the solemn order of the universe under the management of God, they will definitely feel a kind of impetus that urges them to tend to a standardized life and to practice various morality. It can be seen from all things that the Creator is indeed the source of truth, beauty and goodness. In God and the Creator, both refer to God, God's management, and the Creator's truth, goodness and beauty." So, he died of illness. The Royal Academy of Sciences has 5 branches, including the School of Astrophysics, the School of Geography and History, the School of Mathematics, the School of Chemistry, and the School of Biology. Due to the slow development of science in this era, many scientists are basically omnipotent. For example, the famous Galileo in history was mainly an astronomer and physicist, but if he was not good at mathematics, how could he study physics? At the same time, he is also a thinker with his own theoretical system. Therefore, astronomy and physics together, geography and history together, in this era, are basically interoperable at present. Over the past 2 years, it has attracted more than 100 scientists to settle in, among which the School of Astrophysics has the largest number of 85. Copernicus's book is too influential. Geography and history are relatively rare in Europe, with only 18. Biology has an unprecedented 46. It seems that many doctors who want to study corpses are afraid of the church. There were only 8 chemists and 35 mathematicians. A total of 192 scientists have settled in. Although these people's quality is not very good, and they are basically part-time jobs, they have a common advantage: they have a strong thirst for knowledge. Moreover, in the 21st century, the saying that science is the primary productive force is well known to all women and children. What's more, These people are currently useful, for example, chemists used to research and produce explosives, and they are very talented in explosives. Therefore, Edward handed over the goal of researching the new formula of explosives to them. Therefore, the School of Chemistry occupies the largest area and is also the most dangerous. Explosions come out from time to time, and the ears can't bear it. Although nothing has been researched in the past 2 years, it has still made outstanding contributions, for example, in terms of building national roads, building docks, mining, etc. As long as these experts come out, they are guaranteed to complete the amount of explosives, when and where to explode. All have their own tricks, and these chemists are good at it, and mathematicians, who seem to be the most useless, are actually useful. For example, the design of naval ships, the construction of royal palaces, and the design of national roads are all mathematics experts are good at. And the most important point is that England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and various royal territories check their fiscal revenue and expenditure every year, and their budgets are now basically settled and formulated by them, the Ministry of Finance and the Parliament. It can be said that at this time, the experts of the Royal Academy of Sciences are all useful and important in this regard. Edward specially allocated special funds from the royal family as the remuneration and salary of these scientists. The annual salary per person is basically about £100, and the Royal Academy of Sciences has its own land, about 1,000 acres, and the food produced each year will basically be evenly distributed to these academicians as a food subsidy. More importantly, everyone will be granted legal immunity, that is to say, no one can arrest any academician of the Royal Academy of Sciences unless the king agrees, of course, in order to encourage scientific and technological innovation. Academicians of science can get rewards of tens to hundreds of pounds according to their discoveries and inventions, and their annuities are doubled. In addition, part-time jobs have additional income, for example, designing ships and making budgets. There are special allowances that can be obtained if the contribution is particularly significant. It is possible to be canonized as a nobleman, let's put it this way, as long as you get the approval of His Majesty the King or the consent of 2/3 of the academicians, you can become the most respectable person except nobles and officials. This is what many commoners dream of, decent, rich, and carefree. In the afternoon, a huge manor appeared in front of Edward. Chapter 449 Cement Research. A manor with a huge area appeared in front of His Majesty the King, and he couldn't see the site at a glance. The long fence surrounds the grassland and mountains, and the thick wooden boards, like guards, guard this place that represents the future of mankind with their heads held high, showing pride and complacency. The huge manor is scattered with large and small buildings. Some are neat and gorgeous, some are ruined, and some are ugly and narrow. These are the main buildings of each college as a family area. It was placed on the far left side of the manor, which was close to the water source and closer to the town, so it was a good place. A wide road connects the various buildings, the trees are shady, the flowers are lush, and it is a beautiful place. In front of the gate, 4 palace guards guarded it, and they looked quite energetic. The royal carriage stopped in front of the gate, and naturally the head of the guard went to communicate. Edward sat up, and the 2 maids helped him straighten his clothes. As a king, the image outside is very important. After a while, the carriage slowly entered the Academy of Sciences, leaving shallow car marks on the road. Lifting the curtains and looking at this scientific research institute that had just taken shape, Edward felt a different feeling in his heart. If I can't make it right, I am the person who values science the most in this era, and future generations will definitely give me a nice title. My father is the father of the British Navy, so I am the father of European science. I am very happy to think about it. There was a soft sound, and I felt that the carriage had stopped, and Edward was about to get off. Stepping on the stool, Edward set foot on the land of the Academy of Sciences. In front of the carriage, a middle-aged man with a wig, slightly fat, with a small general belly, with a complimenting expression on his face, looks like a kind old man. Welcome, Your Majesty. I am honored to wait. He and the 20 or 30 people behind him shouted scatteredly, looking weak. Academician George, and fellow academicians, there is no need to be too polite. I am here this time mainly to inspect the results of the Academy of Sciences. You are too polite. With a smile on his face, Edward looked at the welcome team of dozens of people, and said softly, he couldn't see the majesty of the king and the senior academicians are used to it, but the new academician looks flattered, his face flushes immediately, his legs tremble slightly, obviously he still can't bear it in his heart. Regarding these polite welcomes, Edward was non-committal. The most important value of this group of scientists lies in their talents, and etiquette is not important. Then, the others dispersed, and Edward chatted with the president of the Royal Academy of Sciences, an astronomer at present. The astronomy community is still studying Copernicus' heliocentric theory and seeking more evidence to verify it, so what Edward talked with him was nothing more than some recent astronomical discoveries while walking. Edward saw the building of the School of Mathematics. The whole building is like a country landowner's villa, rich and bright inside. The offices were in a mess. A lot of draft paper was rolled up, thrown on the ground, and books were scattered. There were only a few mathematicians, who were concentrating on their research and didn't care about the king's arrival. It seems that most people go to work part-time, so forget it. Edward cast a glance, uninterested. He hated mathematics. After that came the School of History and Geography. At this time, there were so many parchments piled up in the rooms of these academicians that the desks couldn't fit for His Majesty's arrival. He only saluted slightly, and then went on to his own business, looking extremely busy. In fact, the reason why they are so busy is the credit of His Majesty the King. After the establishment of the School of Geography and History, Edward asked these scholars to compile a general history of England, then Scotland, Wales, Ireland, in short, finally gathered together to become the general history of the United Kingdom. This is extremely difficult at present, not only lack of information, but also very time-consuming. However, Edward still asked them to continue. History is the backbone of the nation, and it is the best medicine to unite the broad masses of the people. How history is written? The scholars of the time asked this question. The young king smiled slightly. 9 false and 1 true. Came here again, glanced at the first draft that had been completed, and Edward put it down. It took 2 years for the first draft to sort out the history before William the Conqueror and the Norman dynasty had not yet begun. In this way, His Majesty the King and his party came to the Faculty of Arts again, and there were also not many people here. The Faculty of Letters was assigned important figures by the king. They will collect songs from all over England and Scotland, and then use the London pronunciation as the standard to create a language and writing system that belongs to the entire United Kingdom. At present, English is not perfect, and many grammar and words are full of mistakes, even copying Latin. Therefore, the unification of language and characters is the top priority at present. Therefore, after looking at the manuscripts they compiled, Edward also left immediately. The School of Chemistry is the main purpose of Edward coming here. Currently, the School of Chemistry has only one research topic, cement. Earlier, the granulation of gunpowder has been completed, and now about gunpowder. It is just an optimized formula. Cement, a powerful weapon for defending the city, was not born until the 19th century. What would happen if it appeared now? Edward said that he didn't know, but he understood that the emergence of cement is very important to the current England. Brittany and Normandy were easy to attack but hard to defend, and if there is cement, the current artillery will lose most of its power. As long as a few key points are defended, Brittany and Normandy are likely to be defended. Therefore, Edward used his only knowledge. Cement is fired from limestone and clay. I don't know the ratio of limestone and clay, and the details of the ratio of iron powder and gypsum will be added later, but this will make things difficult for these half-bucket chemists. After telling this group of chemists, in the past 2 years, the chemists have almost forgotten their research and put it into practice. I don't know how many times I have experimented. Anyway, the discarded cement has been turned into a hill, and it is still being continuously increased. Seeing these half-bucket chemists perseveringly conducting experiments and working hard for the country and the people, Edward couldn't help feeling a lot. You see, the palms of several people have turned black and gray, dry and cracked, and their faces are disheveled. The clothes on their bodies are torn, and they look as if they're rolled from the mud. What a group of dedicated and conscientious scientists! Edward couldn't help sighing in his heart. Chapter 450. Shit me. The work of cement is both difficult and simple, and it can only be figured out by these half-assed chemists. Seeing the muddy situation on the ground, Edward frowned slightly, and then immediately had a smile on his face. He kindly walked up to the old chemist, helped his lowered head up, and asked, "Academician Abbott, may I ask, is there any progress in researching this cement?" Academician Abbott has a Mediterranean head and a big red nose. He doesn't look like a scientist, but a blacksmith. Edward's nose twitched, and he could still smell a sulfur smell, which he guessed came from gunpowder. "Your Majesty, please forgive us for our dereliction of duty." Although being helped up by His Majesty the King, Academician Abbott still lowered his head, his cheeks flushed slightly, and said in embarrassment, "Although we have put in all our efforts, please forgive us for our negligence. So far, we have not found a suitable formula for the task of cement, and it cannot achieve the effect you requested." At this time, not only him, but even the other academicians in charge of this matter all lowered their heads with embarrassment on their faces. In 2 years, His Majesty the King gave the materials and general direction. They haven't made a breakthrough after 2 years of research, which is really embarrassing academicians. But, my lord, we have made some sudden progress. Edward raised his hand, and was about to comfort these chemists who had worked hard for many years, but they suddenly said such a sentence, which made Edward feel a sense of surprise. Could it be, after repeated tests, we finally discovered that if the bricks and tiles are crushed into crushed sand or clay, mixed together with lime and a small amount of gypsum, and then calcined, something similar to cement can be obtained. As he spoke, academician Abt half bent and led the way. After a while, he came to a gray-black wall, which was about 2 meters high and about 2 meters high at first glance. Edward felt a sense of familiarity. He walked quickly and kicked a few times. The wall was as stable as Mount Tai, leaving only a few footprints. The scholars at the side looked at the king's rude behavior in surprise, full of disbelief. Well, are there any shortcomings in the cement? Edward was also a little embarrassed at this time, glanced at the concrete wall in front of him, and began to change the subject. Our experiments found that this cement often does not solidify. We fired a stone, 112 pounds, 50.8 kilograms, of cement, but only about 10 pounds could be solidified to meet the requirements, and the others were completely unqualified. However, such a wall can withstand the impact of dozens of people, and it is safe and sound, stronger than a castle. Speaking of this, everyone's face is full of regret. The ratio of 11 to 1 is indeed a failure for chemists like them. Failing to meet the conditions is of course a failure, but Edward didn't think so. No matter how much money he spent, the situation was tense. How much does it cost to produce 1 stone of these cements? By this time, Edward was concerned about cost. This, as clay and lime are cheap and readily available, cost only a shilling per stone of cement. Afterwards, academician Abt glanced at the king and said hesitantly Edward didn't care so much, and began to calculate silently in his heart. The 10-meter-long and 3-meter-high courtyard wall at home used 10 bags of cement. If each bag was 50 kilograms, then 1 ton of cement was used in this calculation. It will cost 20 shillings, which is less than 1 pound, which is cheap for the current plan. There is no better way, so just use it as it is. After coming to a cheap conclusion, Edward put a smile on his face again. If the situation is true, academician Abt, and fellow academicians, each of you will receive a reward of 100 pounds. Looking at the team of 9 people in front of him and their dirty clothes, Edward announced loudly, long live my king. Thank God. And just 2 days ago, facing the city of Rennes, the capital of Brittany, the Marquess of Edinburgh was full of thoughts. As the capital of the Brittany region, the city of Rennes is naturally high and strong, making it difficult to conquer. Moreover, the Marquess of Edinburgh also heard that there were more than 1,000 soldiers and a large number of civilians in the city, which made the British army with only 3,000 men not know how to start. Although the Celtics inside couldn't come out, it was difficult for the British army outside the city to enter. For a while, it entered a stalemate. Therefore, 2 days ago, the British army was still outside the city. The reason why the city of Rennes was breached was because the British artillery came. Speaking of cannons, the first ones were bronze cannons, the so-called bronze cannons. This kind of gun is huge, extremely heavy, and has a wide muzzle. It shined during the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. How should I put it? This cannon has always fired stone projectiles in the West, similar to our catapults, but it requires a lot of gunpowder to launch. It was around 1450, more than 100 years ago, that iron bullets began to be fired. In this era, there is a good place in the UK, Sussex. Since the iron cannon technology was introduced to the UK, Sussex's iron-making technology is among the best in Europe. Therefore, after Edward passed some of his superficial knowledge to the military factory, especially the teaching of clay sculpture technology, the iron cannons were mass-produced. Although the range of the iron cannon is not as far as that of the bronze cannon, it is easy to explode and other shortcomings, but it is cheap. In particular, long-barreled guns are still only built on a small scale at present, and cannons are still an important factor in determining victory or defeat. This time, 3,000 British troops, with a full dozen iron cannons weighing 1,000 caddies, came to Brittany without hesitation. Due to the heavy artillery and difficulty in walking, it still arrived 2 or 3 days later than the main force. As soon as the artillery arrived, the Marquess of Edinburgh immediately swept away his worries, and his whole person was in high spirits. 12 cannons were placed neatly in front of the city of Rennes, and the black muzzles were facing the city wall of Rennes at a 45-degree angle, which looked extremely scary. Although there are few cannons on the city of Rennes, God knows if they can still be used. From the 100 Years' War to the present, the city of Rennes has never experienced a war again. The soldiers on the city wall looked at the cannons with bloody mouths. Their faces were pale with fright, and their bodies shook uncontrollably. Hey, Let you not surrender, let you taste the taste of artillery. Looking at the standing city of Rennes, which still stubbornly closed the city gate, the Marquess of Edinburgh immediately laughed. Fire me, blast the city of Rennes. Staring at the city of Rennes, the Marquess of Edinburgh suddenly took a breath, his eyes widened, and he shouted hoarsely. Immediately, the artillery that had already been prepared ignited the gunpowder in an instant. 12 huge stones flew directly forward in a parabolic manner in the middle of the night. I tried anti-piracy. Forgive readers of the original version, the subscription ratio is too low, and I can't get rid of it. Refresh after half an hour, and you can see the real content. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.